I know, Azarin said, the easy smile returning. But this time, he earned it himself. How was the youngest master pre-March? Zarek asked. Unlike Azarin, he didn't have the luxury of standing around watching Asher train. Most of the Primarch's duties fell to him whenever Azarin's interest drifted anywhere that wasn't a blade or family. What can I say? He's a wargrave, Azarin replied, a faint warmth in his voice. And he has his mother's gift with a rapier. If only she were here to see it, to see her wish fulfilled, her child wielding her weapon with pride. The last word softened. Beneath the composure, longing showed. Lily, Azarin's late wife, had been a rapier master. Men, monsters, even the Emoviri fell to her precision. As the Primarch's consort, she needed to be exceptional. To stand beside Azarin, a man beyond ordinary measures, she had to be more than that. She was. The Empire named her Lily of the Abyss, a title spoken with equal parts awe and fear. Azarin loved her from the first sight. Violet hair, amethyst eyes, porcelain skin, a scent he never forgot. But he wasn't Primarch then, and love didn't fit the path before him. Lily loved him too, and she knew Wargrave tradition. Duty first, desire later. When Azarin rose to Primarch, the distance closed. He proposed. Lily did not simply accept. They would duel. If Azarin won, she'd marry him. If he lost, he'd marry her, cook, clean, serve, and obey like a dutiful bride. The term stunned him. Wargraves didn't step into kitchens. They trained and fought while others handled the mundane. He wanted nothing more than to be with her. But he was a wargrave. If battle was the price of love, he would pay it, gladly, especially against someone as fierce and free as Lily. Their duel became legend. Trenches ripped the earth. Ridges collapsed. The ground split under their feet. It wasn't a fight. It was a courtship carved in scars. His victory was the proposal. Her defeat was yes. Even on their wedding night, they chose steel over silk, trading strikes beneath the stars. It was the intimacy they understood. And yet Lily of the Abyss did not die on a battlefield. She died in childbirth. The truth sounded like a lie, but reality spares no one. Before she passed, she asked only that one of her children awaken to the rapier, her art, her legacy. That wish came true. She wasn't here to see it, to guide it, to pass down the dance she made of war. She died with Asher in her arms, her last breath entrusting their son to Azarin. Not a plea, but a final command. Azarin meant to honor it to the end, until he returned to the earth, and to Lily. As for the whispers about Asher's banishment, Azarin never considered it. He heard the rumors and didn't silence them. Not from neglect, but conviction. Asher was Lily's charge, and a wargrave by blood. Wargraves don't falter. Azarin held no doubt. If not the first awakening, then the second. If not the second, the third. Not faith, certainty. That was Azarin Wargrave. Direct, battle-hardened, simple in the ways that matter. He fought with clarity, spoke with purpose, and loved without flinching. Few saw that side. He and Lily raised their firstborn, Malric Wargrave, with fierce care. Malric got the best of them, perhaps too much. Wargraves were known for iron restraint. Malric smiled easily, laughed often, wore his heart where anyone could see it. There was a reason. He grew up drenched in affection and tasked early with guarding his siblings. He embraced it with terrifying sincerity. People whispered about how many he'd killed for a wrong look at his sisters. No one asked if it was true. Malric never believed Asher would be exiled. He knew the pre-march behind the mask. Sensing the shift, Azarin changed course and began to boast. Asher's talent, his speed, the things he'd already done. He even bragged about Asher suppressing his life rank aura as if Zarek hadn't been standing there when it happened. Zarek only listened. He always did. Azarin never shared these fatherly praises with the other ducal houses. He saved them for Zarek. The Primarch might think himself discreet, but Zarek knew better. This wasn't pride as much as it was love. Asher sat cross-legged, steady and calm, while steel clashed around him. The noise didn't touch his focus. In the Wargrave house, no one trained with wood. From day one, it was real blades, real edges. Injuries weren't a concern. Healers stood by. Mastery demanded real stakes. No one spared him a look now. Clinton had pushed him hard, likely stung by Asher's earlier display. Asher opened his eyes, violet, clear, and the world slid back into place. Training resumes tomorrow, Clinton called. The courtyard emptied in tired lines. Evening light stretched long across the first training ground. Asher walked out ahead, unhurried. He knew the layout already. No need to follow the crowd. Up front, the top 3 trainees paused and bowed. Good evening, 10th Sunday. The others, jolted by the reminder, hurried to repeat it in chorus. Good evening, 10th Sunday. Asher hesitated. The synchronized formality felt excessive. Inside the training grounds, skip the greetings, he said with a small smile. Just head out and wash up. He moved on, leaving a wake of stunned silence. They'd expected cold distance, not courtesy. As he walked, a faint current moved through him. Not a surge, just a quiet proof that today's work had taken root. Good enough. Lyra fell in behind him, silent as a shadow. Lyra, it's been a while, he said without turning. It seems training went well, young master. She couldn't enter the first ground, but her senses had followed him all day. She knew he'd masked his life rank. I'd call it fun, Asher said, still riding the clean edge of effort. By the time he reached his room, the sun was gone. He showered, changed, and sat. Lyra brought dinner. He started eating the moment the tray hit the table. Why doesn't the Wargrave family teach elemental manipulation the way they teach Astra? He asked between bites. The ducal house offers foundations, not the whole path, Lyra said from behind him. They chose not to formalize elements, because control learned through Astra can be adapted to govern elemental energy. So, lured himself. Fine. In Crimora, she added, most people train their elements alone. It isn't deep theory. With some sense and talent, progress comes. He nodded. This wasn't the rune chant, circle-drawing magic of other worlds. Here, elements bent more to practice than study. He finished eating. Lyra swept the plates. Good night, young master. It was 8:30 p.m. Training ran 7 to 7. The schedule didn't leave much room for anything else. Asher leaned back and watched the ceiling. With absolute physique, 8 hours probably wasn't necessary. 5 might be enough. He'd test it tonight. There was too much to do. 12 hours in the first ground, then personal work, elements, rapier, cultivation. A steady grind with little slack. So that's why the great families start their children at modest life ranks. Not neglect design. Build the base first. A high rank without substance is brittle anywhere you go. Asher.
Hey everyone, Firescale Audiobooks here. If there's a novel you'd love to hear more of, you can support us on Patreon or Ko-fi. Depending on your tier, I'll make extra parts just for the stories you're most excited about. Usually I can only upload 4 to 5 parts of each novel, but with your support, we can go beyond that. And of course, don't forget to hit subscribe. It helps more than you know.
Time to see if there are any changes to my stats, since I feel subtly stronger, Asher thought with a smile. Status, Asher commanded. Name, Asher Wargrave. Age, 17. Bloodline, the Wargrave lineage. Physique, absolute physique. Titles, youngest heir, 10th son, disgrace of the Wargrave. Unique body holder. Life rank, faint star. Sub-life rank, flare. Affinity, lightning. Strength, 57-58. Agility, 57-59. Vitality, 58. Perception, 52-60. Asher's eyes swept across the changes, analyzing each with growing interest. His strength had risen by a single point expected, given his recent physical exertion. Agility, however, had improved by 2, a direct result of his intensive movement and balance training. Vitality hasn't increased, which was understandable. What truly stunned Asher, however, was his perception stat. It hadn't just improved, it had soared, leaping from the lowest stat to the highest in a single bound, now standing at an impressive 60 points. He could feel the difference. His senses had sharpened considerably, and his omni-perception now extended to a 6-meter radius. Looks like having arrows constantly fired at me actually paid off, he mused wryly. Asher smiled. In just a few hours of training, his progress had been remarkable. His thoughts drifted to his absolute physique, the ability limitless physical growth, an ability that allowed his body to grow endlessly through combat and training. Even without formal cultivation, as long as he pushed himself to the edge, whether through battle or relentless drills, he would shatter that edge and grow stronger in response. Truly broken. But Asher understood the truth behind it. While the concept seemed straightforward, the reality was far more brutal. The stronger one became, the more punishing it was to break past the next threshold. Each new limit was a wall steeper than the last. But that was a concern for another time. Why waste thought on hurdles that weren't yet in his path? Asher immediately settled onto his bed in a lotus position, his eyes closing with practiced ease. Without delay, he began cultivating. Streams of astra in the air stirred, flowing through his pores and coursing directly into his astra veins with rhythmic precision. Just because the first training ground didn't officially allocate time for cultivation didn't mean he would neglect it. He would carve out his own path, even in silence. Hours slipped by unnoticed, and soon it was already 1 a.m. System, is it possible for you to tell me the time? Asher asked as he opened his eyes. Throughout his cultivation, he had opened his eyes several times, checking the clock intermittently. He had set a strict boundary. Cultivation would end at 1 a.m., at which point he would shift into the next phase of his training. The system remained silent. Whether it was genuinely speechless at Asher's attempt to turn it into an alarm clock, or simply unwilling to respond, he couldn't tell. Just as he was about to rise from his bed, the familiar chime finally echoed in his mind, like the reluctant sigh of an overworked assistant pushed into unpaid overtime. Ding! It is possible, host. Asher glanced at the message, a smile tugging at his lips. He gave a small nod of acknowledgement. I'm about to begin my lightning training. It'll only last an hour. End time is 2 a.m. sharp. Notify me. After a short pause, the system responded. Affirmative, host. Asher stared at the ellipses preceding the message, brows twitching slightly. This lazy system, he muttered with a shake of his head. No time to waste. Climbing down from his bed, Asher raised his hand, and crackling lightning surged to life around his fingers. With a focused breath, he willed the energy to flow downward, guiding it from his fingertips to his palm. The lightning arcs brightened, pulsing with a vibrant, sharpened hue as they followed his intent. Drawing upon the fundamentals of his Astra control training, Asher attempted to compress the energy into a sphere, a lightning ball. Within seconds, the orb began to take shape, humming softly with unstable power. He didn't pause to celebrate the minor success. Compared to the vast array of overwhelming abilities he had read about or witnessed, a mere lightning ball felt almost laughable. Without hesitation, he moved on, trying to refine its form. He focused on condensing the sphere, willing it to solidify, then experimented with its size, enlarging it, then shrinking it, only to expand it again. Then suddenly, boom. The unstable lightning ball detonated in front of his face, sending a mild shockwave that instantly blasted his hair upward, transforming it into a wildly spiked mess. In a flash, Virilis materialized beside him, as if asking what was wrong with his control. There's still progress to be made, Asher mused, his eyes narrowing with determination. He didn't relent. Instead, he pressed on, continuing his training with sharp focus. Harnessing his control, Asher began shaping the lightning into rudimentary forms, spheres, lines, crude edges, though most wavered with instability. Still, within mere minutes, the raw potential began to settle. The shapes grew more defined, less volatile. His rapid improvement was undeniable, a testament to both his talent and tenacity. I wonder how long it took others to reach this point, he pondered briefly. But the thought was fleeting. No matter. That has nothing to do with me. System, how much time remains? I've already completed the basics, and it still hasn't been an hour. 10 minutes left, host. Since I've wrapped up the fundamentals of lightning control, let's test something else. With purpose in his step, Asher turned and made his way toward the bathroom. He had long since set his sights on walking on water. If walking on walls is possible, he reasoned, then why not water? The instructor may not have taught it, but that didn't mean it was impossible or that Asher couldn't be the first to do it. With that thought, he filled a wide, tub-like structure to the brim. Channeling Astra into his feet, he took a deliberate step toward the water's surface, only for his foot to plunge straight to the bottom. Just as I suspected, he thought calmly, unbothered. The Astra control method for walking on walls clearly didn't translate to water, and he had intentionally used the same approach to confirm his theory. A slow smile curved his lips as he withdrew his foot. The Astra beneath him shifted under his thought and control. With this new method, he took another step. This time, his foot landed atop the water's surface, steady and undisturbed, not even a ripple. Rising slightly, he placed his other foot beside the first. It too held firm. The smile on his face widened into a grin. How many movie superheroes from my previous life could even dream of doing this? His first failure had sparked a revelation. Walls were solid, water was liquid, their properties opposites. So why not reverse the control method as well? It had worked perfectly. Host, it's time. The system's notification echoed in his mind. Still grinning, Asher stepped off the water and made his way back to bed. Whether he would actually sleep, with excitement surging through every fiber of his being, was another matter entirely. These were once again left speechless. During the Astra control training, Asher demonstrated his ability to walk on water before Virek. Impressed, Virek informed him that water walking happened to be the next phase of their training. The other 3 gifted trainees had also mastered the basic technique. However, Virek raised the difficulty, transforming the calm surface into surging waves, destabilizing the water beneath their feet and making balance far more difficult. But Asher adapted effortlessly. He had already anticipated such a scenario and trained for it by himself before Virek even suggested it. As for wall climbing, Asher was tasked with scaling unstable, uneven surfaces, walls that were anything but smooth. The purpose was clear: to sharpen his control and force his body to adapt reflexively, without the need for conscious correction. Within just 3 days, Asher had shown remarkable progress across every aspect of his training. Over the past 3 days, Asher had grown somewhat closer to the trainees. He never demanded formal greetings. He simply gave a subtle nod in their direction whenever he arrived. To their surprise, Asher turned out to be far more easygoing than they had expected. He neither looked down on anyone nor spoke with arrogance or coldness. Whenever he had a moment to spare, he would casually offer a piece of advice to a nearby trainee. That said, he wasn't going out his way to help others. Asher wasn't nearly charitable enough to offer free guidance without reason. Within the weapon training grounds, Asher moved with effortless ease. His footwork was flawless, each step flowing seamlessly into the next, and his swings and thrusts naturally adjusted in rhythm with his shifting stance. Unlike his first day at the first training ground, when he simply relied on movements from his prior training, this time, Asher observed the movements of Clinton and the others, analyzing their forms and integrating their nuances into his own style. The result was undeniable. His progress had been nothing short of remarkable. Hearing footsteps behind him, Asher turned to see the instructor, Clinton, approaching with a smile on his face. He had witnessed many trainees over the years, but never had he seen such rapid and profound improvement. To train someone this talented, someone capable of achieving the unimaginable, felt like an honor. "You've been training alone for the past 3 days," Clinton said, his tone light but firm. "It's time for a spar." Asher's eyes swept across the field. The top 3 trainees and several others were noticeably absent. He assumed they had been sent to the monster subjugation training. Many of them had already spent over a month in the first training ground. In a month, Asher reminded himself. Though he looked forward to the challenge, he couldn't ignore the unease lingering beneath his anticipation. His first kill might make him nauseous. He might even vomit. In his previous life, he had been just an ordinary person, someone who hadn't so much as killed a chicken. A few cockroaches and ants, perhaps, but even toddlers did that. Will I be sparring with you? Asher asked. Clinton shook his head and replied, No. You'll be sparring with another trainee. Truthfully, with your level of talent, you should be facing the best we have, but he's currently away at the monster subjugation training. Asher gave a small nod in understanding. Clinton then turned toward a boy sparring at the edge of the field. Kale, over here. Hearing his name, Kale immediately halted mid-motion. His gaze turned to Clinton, and without hesitation, he responded, Yes, instructor, before jogging over. Clinton turned to Asher and spoke. This is Kale. Among those who've been here for less than a month, he's currently the most outstanding. In 2 days, he'll begin his monster subjugation training. Asher gave a slight nod, his gaze shifting to the boy beside him, a fellow 17-year-old with striking red hair and sharp black eyes. This is just a weapon-focused training session, Clinton began, his voice clear and brisk. No abilities of any kind are to be used. That includes your rapier skill, 10th Sunday. You'll fight using only your rapier, no astra, no enhancements. He paused briefly, letting the instructions sink in. Only superficial injuries are permitted. No critical strikes, and absolutely no aiming for vital points. Clinton was thorough, knowing this would be Asher's first official spar. He wanted to ensure all boundaries were set clearly. With that, he stepped aside, allowing Asher and Kale to take their positions, standing face-to-face on the sparring field. It's nice to meet you, 10th son, Kale said with a polite smile, choosing his words carefully. Nice to meet you too, Asher replied, his tone relaxed yet clear. I hope you're not planning to hold back just because of my family name. This is a training ground, not a political gathering. And don't worry, win or lose, I won't make your life difficult. He spoke not just to reassure, but to dispel any assumptions Kale might hold. Asher knew all too well that many hesitated around the son of the Wargrave family, fearful of offending prestige. Kale's smile lingered, though a brief frown flickered across his face. Then he nodded. Very well. I won't hold back then, 10th Sunday. With that, he dropped into a battle stance, twin daggers steady in his hands, measure prepared. Asher, in contrast, assumed no stance. He simply inhaled and exhaled, drawing his focus inward, sharpening his senses. This would be his first true spar since reincarnation. Begin, came Clinton's voice from the side. At the sound, Kale lunged forward without hesitation, his dagger slicing through the air in a swift arc aimed directly at Asher's abdomen. Asher hadn't intended to initiate the fight. It was his first real spar, and his strategy was to observe, study his opponent's rhythm before fully engaging. With that in mind, he brought his rapier up to parry. A sharp clang rang out as steel met steel, and a brief cascade of sparks lit up the space between them, marking the beginning of their clash. Kale didn't hesitate. His second dagger shot forward fast, sharp, and unforgiving. He honored Asher's request, holding nothing back. Lowering his stance, Kale drove the blade toward Asher's knees in a fluid, deadly motion. But Asher remained composed. With effortless grace, he flipped forward, soaring above the strike and over Kale, his movement as smooth as flowing water. As Asher flipped overhead, Kale responded in a heartbeat. His waist twisted, shoulders rolling in one seamless motion as both daggers snapped upward, ready to intercept a strike from above. But the attack never came. Asher had only dodged, offering no retaliation. Kale didn't dwell on the reason. His mind stayed sharp, focused. Without pause, he advanced with even greater efficiency. His daggers flashed like twin streaks of silver, one driving toward Asher's shoulder, the other targeting his ribs with ruthless intent. Asher took a single step back, effortlessly slipping past both strikes. But Kale was undeterred, his movements fluid and serpentine, like a viper poised to strike again. Without missing a beat, he flowed into the next assault, his dagger darting toward Asher's wrist, aiming to disarm him of Virilis. A flash of silver answered the threat. Virilis intercepted the blow mid-arc, ringing with a sharp clang. Steel sang against steel. Their eyes locked. Purple met black. No words were exchanged. None were needed. In that silent moment, understanding passed between them. Then, in a heartbeat, they exploded into motion, their figures blurred, vanishing from ordinary sight as speed took over. A storm of movement followed, blades flashing, feet gliding, instincts clashing. The sharp symphony of steel on steel echoed like rolling thunder, marking the rhythm of their escalating duel. Speed met speed. Strength met strength. Metal met metal. The space between them drowned in crimson sparks as their blades clashed and bodies weaved across meters of terrain in fluid motion. Each collision painted the air with flickers of red, fleeting and fierce. Yet not once did Asher strike back. He wasn't here to win. He was here to learn. With no real battle experience to draw from, he welcomed the attacks, using it as a forge for experience. His battle intuition burned brighter with every step, sharpening with each near miss and shifting strike. His purple eyes flickered with focus, dancing within their sockets as they tracked Kale's every move. Posture, footing, the shift of his shoulders against his hips, nothing escaped Asher's gaze. He analyzed it all with eerie clarity, reading Kale like an open book, absorbing every nuance as if etching it into muscle memory. And through it all, his body moved, not from training, but from raw instinct, growing with each heartbeat. He's at the Dust Kindle Star life rank. Asher noted as he moved, reading Kale's strength with growing clarity. There was no surprise. Kale had awakened at 15, granting him 2 full years of cultivation, training, and real combat experience. But to Asher, that gap meant little. His absolute physique was a force unto itself, a gift that defied conventional limits. It bridged the divide that should have existed between them, neutralizing the advantage Kale's rank should have granted. Kale's mind wrestled with the unfolding reality, struggling to comprehend what he was witnessing. It was impossible. No, it was supposed to be impossible. Even for a genius, talent alone couldn't substitute experience. Kale knew that. He was sure Asher knew it too. Otherwise, he wouldn't have made that comment about not making his life difficult if he lost. At this moment, Kale felt as though he were dueling Clinton, their seasoned weapons instructor. The balance in Asher's stance, the subtle angle of his rapier poised for a block, betrayed an unsettling truth. Asher was anticipating his every move before he even completed the motion himself. It was as if Asher was reading the very intent behind his strikes. That level of predictive combat wasn't something a novice should possess. Clinton could do it, yes, but only after decades of hard-earned experience on the battlefield. Driven by his current reality, Kale pushed himself, speed, strength, everything to the absolute limit. But no matter how much he escalated, Asher matched him seamlessly. Asher never surpassed him, never faltered. He simply mirrored Kale's intensity, maintaining a flawless equilibrium. To Kale, it made no sense. Asher had only awakened 3 days ago. By all logic, he should still be at the Dust Fainstar life rank. He was supposed to be weaker. Even accounting for the Wargrave bloodline's inherent physical superiority, it shouldn't have been enough to disregard an entire major life rank. And yet, here he was, defying expectation, transcending reason. Suddenly, Asher disengaged, fluidly stepping several meters back. His breathing remained steady, his posture loose, muscles relaxed, not a trace of tension in sight. Kale watched, uncertain, as Asher stood still, as though both his mind and body were recalibrating, aligning to some unseen rhythm. So, this is the extent of what the current best can offer for now. Asher thought silently. His purple gaze settled on the red-haired boy before him. Then, without flourish or arrogance, he spoke. I will be attacking now. Prepare yourself. Kale couldn't understand why Asher had given him a warning. This was a sparring match, not a duel of honor. Still, his instincts kicked in. His body dipped slightly as he prepared to respond, knees coiled for motion. But he never got the chance. Before his muscles could even fully engage, Asher was already in motion, his figure blurring forward with frightening speed. Virilis, his rapier, moved with flawless synchronicity, carving through the air in a clean downward arc aimed at Kale's shoulder. Kale's footwork shifted reflexively as he moved to intercept the blow, But to his astonishment, the attack never landed where expected. Mid-strike, Asher's blade curved with uncanny twist, altering its trajectory in defiance of momentum. A feint? No, not quite. He readjusted mid-motion. Kale's thoughts raced as he twisted, attempting to intercept the blade, now veering toward his flank. But he was a fraction too slow. Asher's rapier sliced cleanly across his side, the cold kiss of steel meeting flesh. The sharp sound of tearing muscle pierced the air, followed by a fine mist of crimson as blood arced outward in a brief, violent bloom. Kale's eyes widened in shock. Pain flared, sharp, immediate, but it didn't stop him. He'd been injured in spars before. This wasn't new. And truthfully, the pain was manageable, almost dull. Kale retaliated instantly, his twin daggers slicing through the air in a fluid, whistling arc. They moved as one, sharp, chilling, deadly. But Asher didn't block. He simply sidestepped, smooth and effortless, as though he'd seen the strike coming from light years away. How was this even possible? Kale's mind screamed, but there was no time for answers. Asher allowed no pause, no room to breathe. Virilis flashed forward again, a silver streak of death. The blade tore cleanly through Kale's thigh, and a spray of blood erupted, staining the ground below. Pain shot up his leg, but before he could even flinch, Asher was already in motion, his form shifting seamlessly as he moved in for the finishing blow. The rapier blurred once more, a whisper of steel slicing through the air, then halted. Its tip hovered just centimeters from Kale's neck. Kale froze. His Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed hard, black eyes locked onto the unblinking purple gaze that bore down on him with chilling clarity. There was no rage in those eyes, no gloating, just calm detachment, like a judge delivering a verdict. A moment ago, they had stood as equals balanced toe-to-toe. Now, that illusion was shattered. They were anything but that. Clinton stood off to the side, intending to observe the sparring match from start to finish. He was keen to witness the 10th son's performance firsthand, while remaining prepared to intervene at a moment's notice to prevent either Asher or Kale from sustaining life-threatening injuries. He had never once believed Asher stood a chance. Clinton understood the nature of genius. He had witnessed monsters in human form, and had even been the one to train them. After all, every son and moon of the Wargrave family passed through this very first training ground, beginning at the age of 15 and typically concluding by 17. But this situation was different. 2 years of refined experience against none. Kale was no ordinary trainee. He was a slum-born orphan who had been tempered by hardship, forced to fight and steal from an early age just to survive. His battle instincts were forged in desperation, not drills. Without hesitation, he gave the signal. Begin. Clinton observed Asher intently, tracking every movement with the intention of offering corrections later. He analyzed his footwork, the fluidity of his rapier, and the rhythm of his stance, but found nothing amiss. The 10th son moved with a precision that left little room for critique. There was a distinct light in Asher's eyes, a quiet, calculating gleam. Clinton recognized the strategy. Observe first, adapt later. But as the bout progressed, something shifted. This wasn't mere observation. Asher wasn't simply learning. He was absorbing Kale in his entirety, his patterns, his movement, his very self, until the boy before him was no longer an opponent, but an open book laid bare. Clinton watched in stunned silence as the 10th son raised his rapier to block, before Kale had even launched his attack. He could hardly believe what he was seeing. This was supposed to be a novice, someone who had only awakened 4 days ago, a boy who had never once wielded a weapon. By all logic, he should have faltered. He should have taken hits. He should have been overwhelmed, outmatched, outpaced. He was supposed to struggle. He was supposed to survive, not compete. He was supposed to try and keep up. He was supposed to... Clinton had been briefed by Virek, Eloan, and Harold about Asher's remarkable feats during previous training sessions. Yet, he had never taken the time to witness them for himself. Whether occupied with instructing the other trainees or honing his own skills, he simply hadn't prioritized it. Still, he had believed their reports, if only because of the astonishing swordplay Asher had demonstrated on his very first day. Now, as he watched the boy in motion, that belief solidified into awe. Asher flipped forward, sidestepped once, ducked, parried, blocked, and defended, all with seamless precision. Not a single movement was wasted, as though he had been doing it since the day he was born. But Clinton saw more than just skill. He saw elements within Asher's movements. Echoes of familiar techniques. Echoes of himself. Over the past 3 days in the first training ground, Asher hadn't simply swung his sword mindlessly during weapon drills. No, he had watched, absorbed, and internalized. And now, in the heat of battle, he was applying. Clinton's eyes narrowed as realization struck. He had been so captivated by the elegance of Asher's rapier movement that he'd overlooked the impossible. Asher wasn't supposed to move at this speed. He wasn't supposed to be able to react this quickly. By every measure, strength, speed, reflex, he should have been outclassed. And yet, even as Kale ramped up the intensity of his attacks, Asher matched him step for step, stroke for stroke. What has the Wargrave bloodline brought into the world? Clinton couldn't help but wonder. It seems even the limitations of a third awakening can't restrain the Wargrave bloodline, he thought, just as Asher abruptly shifted from defense to offense. His rapier moved with startling clarity, clean, efficient, and unhesitating. Then came a sudden, mid-motion shift in attack. Not a feint, but a deliberate recalibration. Clinton's eyes widened. He had executed that very maneuver just days ago against a trainee. Yet here it was again, replicated flawlessly, not mimicked but mastered. Asher had taken the movement, dissected it, and then seamlessly adapted it mid-combat, adjusting his strike in real time to counter his opponent's defense. Such battle intuition, Clinton mused, eyes narrowed in disbelief. He had heard of individuals capable of evolving mid-combat, those rare fighters who improved with every life-threatening battle. The Primarch himself was said to be one of them, people who baffled stronger opponents by adapting faster than they could overwhelm. But Asher was something else entirely. His battle intuition didn't just rival theirs, it surpassed it by a staggering margin. Even among those gifted with instinctual adaptation, few, if any, could execute what Asher was displaying now. It happened. Asher struck first. A thin crimson line opened across Kale's skin. Another flash of movement, and blood bloomed from Kale's thigh. And then, silence. The rapier stopped at Kale's neck, just a breath away from slicing clean through. The training ground fell into a frozen stillness, as if even the world itself paused to ask whether it could truly give rise to such a genius. Reality bent, and yet no one dared to accept it. Every trainee had only joined the Wargrave family within the last month. None had yet qualified for the monster subjugation. All were still in preparation. And yes, they were talented, each of them chosen for potential, for promise. But this, 3 days. That was all it had taken. 3 days for Asher to defy every standard, to upend every assumption, to surpass what any of them thought possible. Clinton snapped out of his daze, the sharp sound of his boots striking the floor, breaking the stillness that had gripped the training ground. "Congratulations on your first victory, 10th son," he said with a measured smile as he approached. Asher's violet eyes shifted from Kale to meet Clinton's gaze, calm and sharp. "It's thanks to your teachings, instructor," Asher replied, a faint smile touching his lips. Clinton's lips twitched ever so slightly. "Teachings," he echoed in his mind, almost incredulous. "I haven't taught you a single thing." He had intended to guide Asher over the past 3 days. That was the plan. But each time he observed, he found nothing to correct, nothing out of place. And now, to be credited for something he hadn't done? He truly didn't know what to say. He was left speechless. Kale stood off to the side, stunned, bewildered. His entire sense of pride, the foundation of his identity, lay in ruins before the being known as Asher Wargrave. He had always taken pride in being the strongest among the newcomers, those who had been here for less than a month. His talent had never been in question. Clinton himself had praised him on multiple occasions. From the slums to this very moment, Cale had clung to the strength he'd cultivated with his own hands. He'd wielded a dagger long before his awakening, surviving on sheer instinct and grit. But now he understood all too clearly what had transpired. He hadn't just faced a prodigy. He had helped a monster take his first step. He exhaled softly, pushing aside the remnants of shock and turbulent emotion. Though he had nurtured a measure of pride and confidence in his strength, Cale was not naive enough to believe he stood at the pinnacle of talent in this world. He was well aware that monsters roamed this planet, some even within the very family he served. What he hadn't expected was to encounter one so soon, let alone spar with one. "Good match, Cale. Thank you for this." Asher's calm voice broke through the lingering silence. Cale turned, his black eyes locking onto Asher, who approached with a faint smile and an outstretched hand. After a moment's pause, Cale took it and offered a small nod. "Thank you, 10th Sunday. It seems I'll need to train harder if I hope to keep up with you." Asher didn't reply. He simply nodded once, turned on his heel, and made his way to a quiet corner. There he sat down, eyes closed, lost in his thoughts. This had become a ritual of sorts for him, a moment of stillness after every new milestone. Minutes passed. Soon after, the day's training came to an end. Asher exited the training grounds in silence, with Lyra materializing at his side as if by instinct. Neither exchanged words. There was no need. An unspoken understanding had long been established between them. Lyra knew Asher's routine well. After each session at the first training ground, he would return to his quarters to continue his relentless self-discipline. She never intruded upon his silence, never offered unsolicited counsel. She simply observed, ever present, yet never overstepping her bounds. As for Asher, once he discovered that his body could operate at peak condition with only 4 hours of sleep, he embraced the regimen without hesitation. Those few hours became his sole rest, every remaining moment devoted entirely to training. That night passed in quiet intensity, with Asher honing his mastery over the lightning element before finally allowing himself sleep. Dawn crept in gently, sunlight filtering through the room in golden shafts. Asher rose precisely on time. The first training session began at 7 a.m., and punctuality was non-negotiable. He knew he had to arrive early. Harold had no tolerance for tardiness. From what Asher had observed, even his status as a son might not shield him from punishment. Just as Asher prepared to head out, Lyra stepped into the room and spoke, her tone calm and composed. "Good morning, young master. I've been instructed by Mr. Zarek to inform you that your training plans for today have been canceled. You have other matters to attend to. The instructors at the first training ground have already been notified." Asher paused, momentarily caught off guard. He hadn't even completed a full week of training, and now he was being pulled away? Are they assigning me a personal instructor because of my talent? He wondered. It was the only explanation that made sense to him. But why speculate when he could simply ask? "Do you know what this is about?" Asher inquired, his voice calm but curious. "No, young master," Lyra replied, shaking her head lightly. "I did ask Mr. Zarek, but he offered no details, only that we would be informed in due time." With no answers forthcoming, Asher made a quick decision. As much as he would have preferred to continue training, it seemed wiser to conserve his strength in case the day demanded something more physical. Without another word, he climbed back onto the bed and slipped beneath the duvet. Within moments, he was asleep. Lyra watched in quiet surprise. She had expected him to wait in contemplative silence, not drift off so effortlessly. A faint smile touched her lips. Without disturbing the peace, she stepped out and gently closed the door behind her. Though still early when he first returned to bed, just past 6 a.m., for quiet hours slipped by, and the time now stood at 10. A firm knock at the door roused Asher from his sleep. "Come in," he said, rising from the bed. The door opened, revealing Zarek with Lyra standing silently behind him. "Good morning, 10th Sunday. I trust you rested well." Zarek greeted with a slight bow. "I did," Asher replied evenly. "Now, what's going on?" There was no room for pleasantries. His tone was direct. "You'll be briefed by the Primarch himself," Zarek answered with a faint smile, before turning on his heel and exiting the room. Asher exhaled through his nose, his expression unreadable. Without delay, he moved to follow, falling in step behind Zarek as they made their way to wherever the pre-march awaited. They arrived at a location entirely different from where Asher had last encountered the pre-march. It was unfamiliar, yet grand in a subdued, authoritative way. Without hesitation, Asher stepped forward with calm, composed strides. He felt no fear in the presence of the pre-march. The man's lack of warmth, his cold, unreadable expression, was nothing new. It was, after all, a common trait among his siblings. "I greet the pre-march," Asher said, bowing with formal grace, his right hand placed firmly over his left chest. Seated at the head of the chamber, the pre-march regarded his youngest son with golden eyes, piercing, steady, and unreadable. "It seems you've made quite the progress since our last meeting," Azarin said, his tone devoid of emotion, his expression carved from stone. But deep within, hidden behind his stoic mask, the father in him smiled, a quiet, invisible joy that only a parent could feel upon witnessing the growth of their child after tireless effort and expectation. "As your son, that much is to be expected, pre-march," Asher replied smoothly, though internally he cringed at the formality of it all. "I have a task for you," Azarin said, his tone as flat and composed as ever. Asher remained silent, his posture steady. He knew better than to interrupt. "The Emperor's twins will be celebrating their birthday in 5 days. You are to attend the gathering and represent the Wargrave," Azarin stated plainly. Asher's mind stirred. He was well aware of the Emperor, the sovereign of their vast empire, but he had never met the man, nor anyone from the royal family. And now, he was being dispatched to what would likely be a grand, politically charged event. "You will depart today," Azarin continued. "The journey to the capital will take 3 days. That will be all. You may leave." No further details were offered. Just like that, the audience was over. Asher gave a curt nod and turned to leave. Lyra, as always, followed silently, her presence a shadow behind him as they made their way back to his quarters. Once inside, Asher sat on the edge of his bed, his thoughts drifting as silence settled around him. His gaze unfocused, fixed somewhere distant. Royal gatherings like this rarely brought anything good. Being a celebration hosted by the Emperor himself, it was all but certain that the other 3 ducal families would be in attendance, alongside a host of nobles spanning every tier of the aristocracy. In Asher's mind, it was a congregation of prideful peacocks, each vying for power and recognition. And yet, there was a part of him that looked forward to it. All his memories, his entire existence thus far, had been confined within the Wargrave estate. As was tradition, no Wargrave was permitted to set foot beyond its borders until they had awakened their powers. Now, with that right fulfilled, Asher was being sent out into the wider world. For the first time, he would see it with his own eyes, and that, despite the pomp and politics of it all, stirred something within him. "I suppose it's time to meet a parade of arrogant young masters who believe the world revolves around their titles," Asher muttered under his breath, a faint smirk playing at the corner of his lips. His thoughts shifted again. In scenarios like this, an heir traveling to the capital for a high-profile royal event, the risk of an ambush was more than a possibility. It was almost tradition. "I hope they assign enough guards to protect me on the road," he murmured, his tone more practical than fearful. He hadn't suddenly become invincible overnight. There was no cheat or divine shortcut at play. Yes, he was talented, exceptionally so, but talent was only the foundation. Growth required time. He was still at the very beginning of the path, still at the lowest life rank. Despite viewing the event as little more than a gathering of entitled nobility, Asher found himself anticipating it in his own way. He looked forward to witnessing their arrogance firsthand, to hear the boasts of young elites who believed themselves gods in human form. Reading about such characters in books was one thing. Watching them strut and posture in real life, that was an entirely different experience. As Asher sat on his bed, lost in thought about the countless scenes of arrogant nobles being humbled that he might soon witness, a soft knock echoed from the door. "Come in," he said calmly. The door creaked open, revealing Lyra, who stepped inside with a folded cloth draped neatly over her arms. "This is your attire for the party, young master," she said with a gentle smile, extending it toward him. "What do you think?" Asher examined the garment briefly, then gave a faint nod. He didn't dwell on the details. If Lyra had selected it, that was more than enough for him. Her choices had never failed him before. After all, she had basically been picking Asher's clothes since his birth. Rising from the bed, Asher walked over to the wardrobe, standing silently against the wall. With a swift motion, he opened it, retrieved a few garments, and handed them to Lyra. Without needing a word of instruction, she instinctively understood and transferred the items into her space ring. Asher then began preparing a few personal essentials. He wasn't sure if they would come across a river or stream suitable for bathing during the 3-day journey. The customs of this era were still unfamiliar to him, and he preferred to be prepared. Once he had finished, Lyra quietly exited the room. Asher then settled onto the bed, crossed his legs, and began to cultivate, letting his breathing steady as he sank into focused silence. Several minutes passed before another knock echoed from the door. Asher didn't need to ask. He already knew it was Zarek. He had long since learned to recognize people by the rhythm and weight of their knock. Rising from the bed, he walked to the door and opened it. Zarek stood outside, bowing slightly as he spoke with respectful composure. "Everything is ready. 10th Sunday." Asher gave a silent nod and followed behind him. They descended the staircase and moved through a vast, echoing hall. Eventually, Asher stepped outside. The estate slowly came into view, majestic and expansive. Twin water fountains flanked the entrance to the manor, one on each side, their crystal streams rising and falling in a rhythmic dance. Neatly trimmed grass rolled across the land in soft, verdant waves, while towering trees spiraled skyward, their branches swaying gently as the wind whispered through them. The breeze added a touch of grace to an already breathtaking scene. How vast! Asher mused inwardly. In his previous life, even those within the top 1% of society would have struggled to afford a place of this grandeur. Perhaps only the elusive top 0.1% could claim such luxury. He exhaled softly and shook his head, dismissing the thought. He approached the grand carriage station ahead, its frame imposing, its surface a striking blend of deep black and radiant gold plating. Asher didn't need a guess. This wasn't merely gold-colored paint. No, it was genuine gold, gleaming under the light with unmistakable opulence. So this is how nobles live, he thought, a flicker of surprise crossing his mind. He tried to recall if anyone in his previous life had ever plated their cars in gold or diamonds. He couldn't think of a single one. It suddenly struck him how little he had thought about Crymora's transportation systems. His time had been consumed entirely by relentless training. Somewhere in the back of his mind, he had expected the kind of basic wooden carriage he'd read about in books. What stood before him, however, was anything but ordinary. 2 imposing horses stood silently at the front of the carriage, exuding calm strength, as though awaiting a silent command. Beside the carriage, Asher took note of 5 guards stationed vigilantly. Each was clad in polished armor, their long capes cascading down their backs in dignified folds. Embossed on their chests, and on the side of the carriage, was the unmistakable crest of House Wargrave, a blazing sun, rendered in exquisite detail, its flames seemingly alive. Though Asher could faintly sense traces of aura seeping from their bodies, he couldn't determine their exact life ranks. Their strength was clear, but not easily measured. He turned slightly to glance at Zarek, who stood silently behind him, composed as ever. "Goodbye, Zarek. See you in a few days," Asher said, his tone calm. With that, he stepped into the carriage with steady, purposeful strides. Lyra followed closely behind, her movements graceful and silent. The youngest master is finally leaving the estate for the first time, Zarek thought, the ever-present smile on his face deepening slightly with quiet pride. Across the estate grounds, several maids and butlers had paused in their duties, their gazes fixed on the departing carriage. It was a rare sight. Asher Wargrave, born into legacy and silence, was leaving the estate for the very first time since his birth. "Let's move," came Asher's calm command from within the carriage. The coachman responded instantly, snapping the reins with practiced precision. The horses surged forward, and the grand carriage eased into motion. The armored guards fell into formation around it, their movements synchronized and silent, like shadows escorting nobility into the world. Asher had anticipated an uncomfortable ride, jolting up and down with every bump in the road. But to his surprise, the carriage glided forward with remarkable smoothness. It was clearly engineered for luxury, every detail crafted with comfort in mind. Of course, it made perfect sense. There was no world in which nobles of any status would endure days of travel and discomfort without devising an elegant solution. The journey remained smooth, the only sound accompanying them the whispering roar of wind as the carriage sliced effortlessly through the air. A gentle breeze drifted into the cabin through the open window, where Asher sat, his gaze fixed on the passing landscape. Then, without warning, his hand shot out, gripping the edge of the carriage with extreme ease. In one fluid motion, he pulled himself upward, his body twisting midair with a natural grace. He vaulted through the window and landed atop the carriage roof with effortless ease, as if gravity itself had chosen not to interfere. Asher was fully aware of the risk of what he just did. An arrow loose from the shadows could end his life in an instant. But he also understood the nature of such threats. Assassins rarely struck so close to their target's home. They preferred to wait, often days into the journey, when reinforcements would be far out of reach and escape routes limited. The wind lashed against his skin, sharp and wild, yet strangely invigorating. Around him, the world blurred in motion, a rush of color and speed that danced at the edges of his vision. Tilting his head upward, Asher's eyes settled on the sky. Wisps of white clouds drifted lazily across the expanse, streaked against the soft blue canvas above. For a moment, he simply watched, silently admiring the vastness, the freedom, and the quiet majesty of the heavens. "These horses are far faster than any ordinary breed," Asher observed, eyes fixed on the blur of their powerful strides. The speed was extraordinary, yet unsurprising. After all, Astra had catalyzed the evolution of nearly every living being in this world. Despite the wind resistance, Asher remained steady, his body instinctively adapting, balanced against the rush of air. For a while, he simply watched in silence, taking in the ever-shifting landscape that stretched out before him. Eventually, he lowered himself to a seated position atop the carriage, his expression calm, contemplative. "Jennifer would love this view and probably the party I'm headed to," he thought, a small smile tugging at his lips. At least at this gathering, he bore the title of a duke's son. There would be no tired cliché of being dismissed for lacking noble blood, not this time. "Though some might still look down on me for awakening so late," he admitted inwardly. But the thought barely lingered. Let them. The smile remained, undisturbed. As the carriage rolled steadily onward, a mounted guard finally broke the silence. "10th son, forgive the intrusion, but it isn't safe atop the carriage," he said with a respectful tone. Asher, eyes closed in quiet thought, slowly opened them. He turned to the guard and gave a slight nod. With effortless grace, he slipped back into the carriage, his movements fluid and unhurried. "How was your moment of peace, young master?" Lyra inquired from her seat opposite him, her voice calm. "Refreshing," Asher responded briefly. He had little else to add, though he had genuinely enjoyed the wind's gentle caress and the fleeting glimpse of the vast world passing by. The sun dipped beneath the horizon, and the cloak of night began its slow descent, casting the world into shadows. Not once during the journey had they paused for rest, but with darkness now reigning, they had no choice but to halt. Asher stepped down from the carriage, the silver light of the moon catching in the strands of his purple hair, giving them an ethereal glow. The moment his boots touched the earth, Lyra positioned herself a single step behind him to the right, while a guard mirrored her on the left. Asher made no remark about the added vigilance. Night had fallen. Caution was no longer a courtesy, but a necessity. Asher's gaze drifted to the horses, a flicker of curiosity in his eyes. They had been running since morning without pause. Yet even now, they showed only the faintest signs of exhaustion, just a soft panting as they lay gracefully upon grass. Around him, the guards moved with practiced efficiency, their motions fluid and precise, as though they had performed this routine 100 times beneath 100 different moons. Under the quiet silver light, tents began to rise. With a faint shake of his head, Asher turned away and stepped inside his tent. Lyra followed silently, her presence a constant shadow. 2 guards took position at the entrance, their silhouettes standing firm against the backdrop of the night. With a graceful wave of her hand, Lyra summoned a large bed that materialized in the air before descending gently onto the mat a guard had laid out earlier. "You brought this with you?" Asher asked, genuine surprise flickering in his voice. He hadn't expected such comfort out here in the wilderness. "Your comfort is my priority, young master," Lyra replied with a serene smile. Another wave of her hand, and a polished table appeared, accompanied by a spread of elegantly arranged dishes, warm, aromatic. Asher blinked. "When did you even have time to prepare all this?" "We barely packed anything after the pre-march announced our departure. The chefs couldn't possibly have cooked this on such short notice." He sat on the edge of the bed, pulling the table closer, his curiosity still lingering even as the scent of the food pushed him to dig in. "On the day of your awakening, young master," Lyra replied calmly, "since you spent the entire day in solitude, I took the opportunity to visit the kitchens. The chefs prepared a wide array of dishes from morning until night." Asher took a bite, his expression thoughtful. "Why go to such lengths?" "Because your awakening marked a turning point," she said matter-of-factly. "It was only a matter of time before we left the estate. I needed to be prepared for nights in the forest or inns whose food may not meet your standards." Asher chuckled softly, a smile tugging at his lips. "I have to hand it to you, Lyra. You really are too good." "It's my duty, young master," she replied, returning his smile with quiet pride. Asher, noticing Lyra standing silently like a statue while he ate, felt a quiet urge to invite her to join him. He knew what her answer would be. She would refuse. But still, he asked, better to offer and be turned down than say nothing at all. "You don't have to just stand there like a statue. Join me, at least for tonight," he said, his eyes focused on the dishes laid before him. Lyra turned her head toward him, surprise flickering in her eyes. The suggestion was almost unthinkable. Servants did not dine with their masters. Still, she answered with composure, "I appreciate the offer, young master. But given my life rank, I can go several weeks without nourishment." Asher didn't press the matter. He simply gave a small nod. Her response was exactly what he'd expected. Despite the closeness they shared, there were invisible lines drawn between them, boundaries that Lyra would never cross, no matter the circumstance. So, it's not as exaggerated as those novels claim. Characters with high cultivation going years without food, or abandoning it altogether, sustaining themselves entirely on energy. Asher thought silently. The reality, it seemed, was far more grounded. The tent settled into a tranquil silence, broken only by the soft clinking of cutlery as Asher finished his meal. A gentle golden light flickered within the tent, casting warm shadows along the fabric walls. Asher dabbed a napkin across his lips. Without delay, Lyra gave a small wave of her hand, and the dishes vanished soundlessly into her space ring. "Good night, Lyra," Asher murmured, settling onto the bed, the duvet still neatly draped over him. "Good night, young master," she replied softly. With a subtle motion, she extinguished the light, and darkness embraced the tent like a velvet curtain. But she didn't step outside to stand guard by the tent's entrance. No, she remained within, quietly shifting to a different position. Her presence seemed to melt seamlessly into the darkness, as if she were part of it. Lyra wouldn't risk leaving Asher's side. Not here, not in a forest swallowed by night. This was the kind of place where silence breathed danger, where the right set of skills, abilities, or elemental affinity could turn an assassin into a ghost. And with that, only the soft rustling of leaves remained, whispers in the dark, swaying to the rhythm of the wind's quiet song. Outside, the guards stood silent, their senses honed to a razor's edge, prepared to react to even the faintest disturbance. They all knew one truth. If the 10th son returned with even a single strand of hair out of place, the Wargrave family would tear the Empire apart to find out why. The Wargraves might wear cold expressions and speak with veiled hostility toward one another, but that coldness was reserved for themselves. Should anyone outside their bloodline dare show the same indifference, or worse, hostility toward a Wargrave, it was considered nothing less than a death sentence. Yes, the sons and moons of the Wargrave house may wage quiet wars among themselves, vying for the seat of the Primarch, but those battles ended at the family gates. Beyond those walls, they stood as one, unshakable and merciless. But Asher didn't know this. He didn't know that if an assassin were to strike tonight, even if it were killed before reaching him, silenced by a single guard, the Wargraves would still hunt down the assassin's organization and raze it to dust before dawn. The morning sun crested the horizon, gradually dispelling the veil of darkness that had draped itself over the forest. Within the quiet stillness of the tent, Asher's eyes fluttered open, their purple hue catching the soft rays that slipped through the fabric. "Good morning, young master," came Lyra's gentle voice from the side. Asher offered a faint nod before asking, "Is there a river nearby where I can bathe?" He had assumed a stream would be close enough for that purpose, but Lyra shook her head with a knowing smile. "No, young master. I've already taken care of it," she said, gesturing ahead. Asher stepped out of the tent, the warmth of the morning sun brushing against his face like a silent welcome. "Good morning, 10th son," the 5 guards said in unison, immediately bowing in respectful greeting. Asher gave a brief nod. Did anything happen during the night? Any disturbances like an assassin? "No, 10th son," one of the guards replied, his voice steady and respectful. "So, nothing then," Asher thought silently, his eyes scanning the tranquil forest clearing where they had made camp. 3 tents stood in the quiet morning light. The first belonged to Asher himself. The second, slightly smaller and more modest, housed the coachman, an ordinary man among warriors. The third tent, before which Lyra now stood silently, was unfamiliar to Asher. Without a word, he began walking toward it. As he drew aside the flap and stepped inside, he was greeted by the sight of a large, basin-like structure, his makeshift bath, prepared and waiting. Neatly arranged beside it were his bathing essentials and the clothes selected for the day. Asher shook his head, a faint smile tugging at his lips. Of course, there's no way these nobles would ever bathe in a stream or river. With that thought, he bathed swiftly, changed into the clothes laid out for him, and stepped back outside. Returning to his own tent, he had a simple yet well-prepared breakfast before boarding the carriage once more. Without delay, their journey resumed. Second day already. We should reach the capital by tomorrow night, Asher thought, his gaze drifting lazily out the carriage window, his expression steeped in boredom. The silence, the stillness, it all pressed in on him. Am I truly meant to sit inside a carriage for 3 days, doing nothing but stare at trees and sky? The thought lingered like a haze. This stretch of the journey felt endlessly dull, as if time itself had slowed to a crawl. Hours slipped by unnoticed, the sun now perched high at its zenith, casting sharp rays through the forest canopy. The carriage rocked gently as it moved along the uneven path, and for the first time since the journey began, Asher noticed Lyra's gaze shift toward the window. A voice from outside broke the stillness. "Stop the carriage," one of the guards ordered. Without hesitation, the coachman obeyed, pulling the reins and bringing the carriage to an abrupt halt. Asher turned to Lyra, whose posture remained unchanged, calm and unshaken. "Is it an assassin?" he asked, his tone casual, almost indifferent. Then, a moment later, he blinked and let out a soft breath, mildly amused. Why did that sound like I was hoping for an assassination attempt? A wry smile crept onto his face at the thought. No, young master, Lyra replied calmly. Merely a cluster of low-level monsters, creatures too dull to know when to attack and when to flee. At her words, Asher rose from his seat and stepped out of the carriage. A quiet curiosity stirred within him. Since his transmigration, he had yet to see a single monster, had yet to witness the world's dangers firsthand. Not even an Emovira, a creature he'd read about, had crossed his path. He hadn't experienced a single battle, not yet. He still has to wait over 3 weeks to see any action within the first training ground. Lyra followed closely behind, walking just behind Asher with the silent grace of shadow. As he approached the guard station ahead, Asher's gaze swept across the forest, but saw nothing. The clearing remained still. No movement, no sound beyond the rustling of leaves. Yet he was certain they were coming. He trusted that the guards and Lyra had sensed their presence from a distance away. Only one guard dismounted, the others remaining astride their horses. Clearly, the threat did not warrant full mobilization. What rank are the monsters approaching? Asher asked, standing near the carriage, his gaze fixed in the same direction the guards were watching. They're merely whisper-ranked beasts, led by a single echo-ranked pack leader, 10th Son, the dismounted guard replied, already preparing to intercept them. Asher folded his arms, his expression contemplative. So whisper-rank monsters with 1 echo. He recalled the hierarchy he had read about. In this world, monsters are classified across 10 tiers. Whisper, Echo, Veil, Fong, Mark, Grave, Crown, Myth, Void, End. But then a thought struck him, sharp and clear. This was an opportunity. His opportunity. Back in the Wargrave First Training Grounds, he was bound by protocol, forced to wait an entire month before being allowed to face a monster. But here, beyond those regulated walls, such restrictions held no power. Out here, the world was untamed. True, he had never killed before. Even these whisper-ranked creatures had been fighting to survive since birth. They would be more experienced, more instinctive, more ruthless. But Asher had something they didn't: superior stats. There might not be another chance like this, he reasoned. Even if I get critically injured, there are 5 guards here ready to wipe them out and pull me back. Lyra, too. She wouldn't let me die. And while there were no healers present, the passive regeneration from Virulus Crimson Pact would restore his wounds if it came to that. The decision solidified in his mind. He would face the monsters. With his current strength, he could likely dispatch them in an instant, leave not a single one standing without taking a scratch. But he didn't intend to. That wasn't the point. He would fight them like he fought Kale. Deliberately. Purposefully. Experience was what he lacked most, and nothing, not stats nor talent, could replace that. He would observe. Wait for openings. No matter how weak the enemy, he would draw everything he could from each battle until his foundation was forged. But that didn't mean he planned to get injured. With that thought solidified, Asher turned to Lyra, who stood silently behind him. He removed his coat and handed it to her. She accepted it wordlessly, her brows faintly furrowing in confusion, but she said nothing, choosing instead to observe in quiet curiosity. Without another word, Asher strode forward, stopping just a step ahead of the guard who had been preparing to engage. "I'll handle them," he said, his voice calm and steady. "If anything goes wrong, you're free to intervene." That is an order. He didn't look back as he spoke. His tone left no room for debate. The guard parted his lips to object, but the words never came. It was a direct order from his son. Even so, if the 10th son were to be injured under his watch, the consequences would be severe. He hesitated, torn between duty and obedience, then slowly stepped back. At the very least, Asher had granted him permission to intervene if things took a turn for the worse. The moment his foot retreated, the rest of the guards followed suit, dismounting swiftly from their horses. Their hands hovered near their weapons, eyes sharp, muscles tense, ready to spring into action at the slightest sign of danger. Lyra moved forward as well, positioning herself a few steps behind Asher. Her expression remained unreadable, but her aura had shifted, silent, watchful, prepared to protect. No one spoke. No one dared. All eyes were fixed on a young man who stood at the front of the group. They were about to witness it, the 10th son's first true battle. Asher stood in composed silence, his heartbeat measured, each breath drawn with a focused calmness. In a blink, Virilis materialized in his palm, its blade resonating with a quiet hum, an eager whisper, as though thirsting to taste real blood and cleave through living flesh for the first time. His gaze remained steady as he listened. Leaves trembled in warning, rustling with increasing urgency. Whatever was approaching was fast, and it was drawing near. The instant they emerged from the forest shroud and stepped onto the open path, Asher saw them. Wolves? How predictable. It's always wolves or goblins, first to appear, first to die. The thought edged with irony. The first wolf lunged, its jaws wide open, fangs gleaming as it aimed to tear through Asher's neck in a single savage bite. But Asher moved effortlessly, precisely, his body shifting sideways at the final instant, matching the creature's speed with unnerving ease. The beast's maw snapped shut with a sharp crack, biting into nothing but air where Asher's throat had just been. Then, before it could even recover, a silver flash arced across its vision. The wolf froze mid-step. A breath later, its head slid cleanly from its shoulders, severed with such elegance it barely registered the strike before falling to the earth. But Asher was already gone. In the blink of an eye, he was on the move again. The wolves came in waves, surging from the front, flanking from the sides, closing in from behind. A coordinated hunt. Yet Asher didn't flinch. He didn't panic. His body responded on instinct. He bent slightly at the knees, muscles coiling tight, then released like a spring unbound, launching into the air with explosive grace. Mid-flight, his body twisted. Virilis sang once more, its hum rising with anticipation. Then, guided by gravity and precision, Asher descended. With a single forward thrust, the gleaming rapier pierced clean through the skull of another wolf, silencing its snarl before it ever reached him. The moment Asher's feet touched the ground, claws filled his vision, from the left, the right, all at once. But Virilis moved faster. With a single, fluid motion, he parried, his rapier slicing through a wolf's extended forelimbs, severing them cleanly. The beast shrieked in agony, but the cry was short-lived. Before it could even collapse, Asher was already in motion, his blade cleaving through its torso, splitting the creature in two. A crimson spray followed, dyeing Virilis red as he pressed forward. The space around him erupted with motion. Slash, thrust, weave, sidestep, footwork. Each step was precise, every movement deliberate. Even with his stats suppressed, Asher moved like a predator among prey, a silver wolf amidst a flock of startled hens. Corpses fell in his wake. Crimson blood soaked the earth, staining brown soil and green grass alike. But Asher didn't slow. He didn't falter. He was still moving. He kept moving. A wolf lunged from behind, aiming for a blind spot, but Asher had already seen it. Omniperception had marked its presence long before it struck. Without hesitation, Asher dipped to the side, his center of gravity shifting seamlessly with the motion. In a single, fluid twist, he pivoted to face the beast's flank. His arm moved, Virilis moved as one with him. From below, a brutal upward slash arced forward. With a wet, sickening rip, the rapier's edge tore through the wolf's abdomen, flesh and muscle parting like silk beneath Virilis' teeth. Asher rose slowly, his posture composed, his breathing unbroken. His white shirt, once pristine, was now drenched in red. Blood stained his arms, splattered across his frame, but his eyes remained calm. The remaining wolves had already halted their assault, their snarls fading into whimpers. Instinct screamed at them. They had chosen the wrong prey. Now, they stood frozen, tails tucked low, eyes wide with primal fear. Their pack formation unraveled, hesitation spreading like wildfire. Asher's purple gaze swept over them, cold and unblinking. He saw it clearly. The fight had left them. Their will to battle was gone, crushed beneath the weight of a single human's presence. There was no need to suppress himself any longer. Nothing left to gain from holding back. So, why not test something else? The wolves barely had time to twitch before Asher vanished. His form blurred into a streak of purple. Lightning laced his body, crackling with raw intensity. A sharp, thunder snap echoed through the forest, searing the air, crackling in everyone's ears. Asher had moved. No, he had erased the space between them, crossing the distance in an instant, as though it had never existed at all. Before the wolves could even blink, their existence had already ended. A single thrust, a single slash. That was all it took. But Asher didn't stop. He moved through the pack like a living storm, a blur of steel and purple lightning. Virilis danced with him, clean, efficient, merciless. Blood burst into the air like ink spilled on canvas. Innards scattered. Heads rolled. Limbs fell with dull, wet thuds as he carved through them. In less than 3 seconds, it was over. Asher stood exactly where he had been before, as if he had never moved at all. The purple lightning crackling across his body slowly receded, quieting into a hum before vanishing completely. There was nothing more to gain from these creatures, not power, not knowledge, not growth. He had simply used them to test his lightning in real battle. Whisper-ranked monsters were the lowest of the low for a reason. They had no true abilities, no elemental control, no innate powers. Just claws, fangs, and basic senses like heightened smell and hearing, which they'd already possessed even before Astra's touch had evolved them. They were little more than upgraded beasts, predators to most, prey to Asher. As Asher stood in silent thought, something breached the edge of his omni-perception, a presence deliberate, heavier than the others. He didn't need a guess. He already knew. The Echo-ranked pack leader had arrived. He hadn't forgotten about it. He was merely waiting. Unlike Whisper-ranked creatures, some Echo-ranked monsters had awakened abilities. Others remained mundane, relying on brute strength and instinct. But this one, Asher had already suspected it possessed something more. It was a pack leader after all. Without hesitation, Asher spun around, Virilis flashing forward like silver lightning to intercept the incoming strike. Then he saw it wind. It coiled around the wolf's extended claws, sharpening them into whirling blades of compressed air. The collision came with a soft yet forceful boom, like thunder behind silk. The impact echoed out, spiderweb cracks rippling across the ground beneath their feet. Asher's eyes narrowed. The wind-infused claws slammed into his body, not deep, but sharp enough to tear through flesh. Blood welled from the tears, and mild pain flared in his nerves. Still, he didn't yield. Instead, he increased the strength behind his guard, forcing the beast back just a few steps, but it was enough to shift the momentum. "It seems I was careless," Asher murmured, his voice quiet but edged with clarity as his gaze fell to the shallow cuts carved across his chest and shoulders, thin lines drawn by wind-based attack. This was the difference. The difference between one who had lived through battles and one who hadn't. Experience. A seasoned fighter wouldn't have fallen for such a thing, would have read the wind before it ever struck. But Asher didn't mind. This was why he was here, to earn that experience with blood, steel, and pain. From the edge of the field, Lyra's eyes narrowed. The moment she saw the wounds, her posture shifted. She prepared to move, hand instinctively brushing the hilt of her weapon. There were no healers among the guards. If the 10th son sustained another hit, especially one deeper, he could bleed out before the battle even ended. She couldn't allow that. But before Lyra's thoughts could fully form, she saw it. The blood on the ground, spilled from slain beasts, began to stir. It rose in thin, twisting strands, as if possessed by will, slithering through the air toward Virilis. The rapier pulsed faintly, its silver teeth edge absorbing the crimson threads like a starving relic. The blade shimmered, and in that moment, the wounds across Asher's chest and shoulders snapped shut with unnatural speed, torn flesh knitting together in seconds as if time itself bent around him. A small smile, touched Asher's lips as he watched the final traces of blood vanish from his skin. But the wolf wasn't watching. It moved, fast and feral, lunging to capitalize on what it perceived as a moment of distraction. A fatal mistake. Asher didn't need to look. Omniperception had already mapped the wolf's every twitch, every violent intention. Even without turning his head, he saw it, clear as day. The moment it sprang, he was ready. Asher's form blurred, a sudden, violent streak of motion. The claws came again, slashing through the air with lethal force, but this time he didn't block. He dipped low, fluid, and effortless, the attack sweeping harmlessly overhead. Then Virilis screamed through the air as it moved. With a single, devastating thrust, the rapier tore through the beast's hind limb. The wolf howled in agony, but Asher didn't slow. In the same breath, he moved, cutting low, and in one clean motion, severing the second hind limb. The wolf crashed to the ground, its rear legs now nothing but ruined flesh and bone. But Asher was already gone again, only to reappear in front of the creature like a ghost stepping through time. Virilis was already mid-descent. With surgical precision and terrifying ease, the rapier cleaved through both of the wolf's front limbs. No resistance, no struggle, just flesh parting beneath divine steel, like a blade through butter. For limbs gone, the wolf's howl rose in pitch, a piercing, agonized cry, as it lay limbless in the dirt. Its body trembled, blood pooling beneath it in thick, steaming rivers. And then it looked up. Fear now filled its eyes. Not rage, not pride, just the cold, primal fear of a predator realizing it was nothing more than prey. But Asher didn't flinch. He moved twice. Two quick thrusts, like flashes of silver lightning, and Virilis pierced both of the beast's eyes. Blood and darkness swallowed its vision, leaving it blind in its final moments. Virilis slipped from Asher's grip, not falling but floating. It hovered above the wolf's ruined form, humming low and sharp with a metallic resonance. In a flash of silver, it arced downward in a full, graceful swing. A clean decapitation. The wolf's head dropped from its neck with a soft thud, rolling gently before going still. For a moment, Virilis lingered there, suspended in the air, as though gazing down upon the creature that dared harm its master. It hovered in silence, judgmental, almost sentient, before drifting back to Asher's side. It hummed contentedly now, like a weapon that had fulfilled its vengeance. Asher smiled faintly at the display. He said nothing, simply letting Virilis float beside him, its blade still faintly warm with blood and retribution. Asher cast one final glance at the corpse, then turned away, expression unreadable, mind already shifting beyond the battle. Unlike humans, monsters didn't have to train to use their abilities. They were born with them, raw, instinctive, natural. From the very first breath, they wielded their abilities as easily as they breathed. The wolf had been able to coat its claws in wind without effort. But Asher, he couldn't yet coat Virilis in lightning. Not yet. He was almost there. But he could channel it through himself, let lightning wrap around his body like a second skin, crackling along his frame, heightening his speed, sharpening his reflexes. High above Asher's location, nestled within the drifting white clouds and a vast expanse of blue sky, a figure stood silently atop a colossal bird. The figure bore striking golden eyes and hair that shimmered like sunlight. Yet, the creature beneath him was no mere monster. It was an Emovira. Emoviri are enigmatic creatures, divided into two distinct types: positive Emoviri and negative Emoviri. Negative Emoviri are born from emotions such as fear, sorrow, and despair. They are aggressive by nature, attacking anything they perceive on sight. In contrast, positive Emoviri emerge from emotions like love, hope, and joy. Unlike their darker counterparts, they do not attack unless provoked. Though cautious, they are inherently docile, capable of forming bonds with humans. However, taming one is no simple feat. It requires besting them in battle first. As for the negative Emoviri, they cannot be tamed. It is a brutal exchange. Either you die, or they do. There is no middle ground. A crimson cape cascaded down the man's back, billowing gently in the wind. Vambraces adorned his forearms, while leather gloves encased his hands. His legs were protected by polished greaves, and his torso was clad in a radiant golden breastplate that gleamed beneath the sunlight. This was Azarin Wargrave. Behind him stood Zarek, unchanged in appearance, his attire as pristine as ever. He remained dressed in his classic black butler suit, complete with immaculate white gloves, a silent shadow at Azarin's side. At that moment, a broad smile played on Azarin's lips as he gazed down upon the battlefield below. When Asher had departed from the Wargrave estate, Azarin had followed, silently, from the skies above. He had initially intended to abstain from attending the event altogether. But then came a personal message from the Emperor himself, urging his presence. With such a summons, refusal was no longer an option. And so, Azarin moved. Yet before heading directly to the venue, he chose to shadow his son's journey, curious to see what would unfold. As he looked down now, pride flickered in his golden eyes. His last son had not disappointed him. Azarin, are you sure that little monster is truly your son? Even you weren't this much of a genius, despite being hailed as a prodigy reminiscent of the ancient days, Zarek remarked, his gaze fixed on Asher below. His tone was casual, far removed from the respectful demeanor he always displayed within the Wargrave estate, especially in the presence of the Primarch. But this was the nature of their bond. Despite the vast difference in their status, one a butler, the other the Primarch of House Wargrave, and one of the most formidable men in the Empire, their relationship transcended titles. In public, Zarek addressed Azarin with the reverence expected of any servant toward their master. But in private, all formality fell away. He spoke as an equal, as a trusted companion, one who remembered the man behind the title. "You're just jealous he's not your kid," Azarin said with a teasing smile, his eyes still fixed on the scene below. "Why would I be jealous of that?" Zarek replied matter-of-factly. "Even if I did have a child, I doubt they could compare to a Wargrave. In House Wargrave, the rules were clear. Maids and butlers were permitted to have families. The no-birth decree applied only to those of the bloodline, not the retainers who served them. I've told you before, go have a child already, so I could be an uncle. I'd even guide him a little. You know, everyone dreams of being mentored by me," Azarin added, his grin widening. "You already have 10 children, Azarin. Not everyone has your stamina," Zarek said calmly. "Besides, would I even have time for my own child if I'm always stuck at your side?" Azarin chuckled at that, but said no more. He didn't press Zarek about fatherhood again. "So what do you think?" Azarin asked, his voice light, yet laced with curiosity. "Think about what?" Zarek replied without turning his gaze. "Now that you've seen his talent, are you considering resignation? Ready to start serving him instead?" Azarin said with a smirk. Zarek let out a thoughtful hum. "What he has is talent and potential, not power. Not yet. Certainly not like yours. Besides, why would I give up the privilege of serving the Primarch? Do you realize how much authority and access to resources I'd be forfeiting?" "Oh." Azarin's golden eyes shifted toward Zarek, a playful gleam within them. "So you've been using me to amass influence and power, is that it?" Zarek chuckled, unfazed. "It's only fair. After all, I handle half the responsibilities that should be yours." Azarin gave a small, amused shake of his head. His gaze drifted downward once more, catching sight of Asher's rapier as it floated beside his son, humming softly. "Don't they remind you of us after our first real battle, Ender?" Azarin said softly, his voice carrying a hint of nostalgia. As he spoke, a long spear materialized beside him, its shaft black as night, its edges streaked with crimson. It hovered silently at his side, humming with a low, resonant tone, as though acknowledging his words. Its unseeing gaze, too, was locked on the battlefield below. This was Azarin's weapon, his spear. He had named it Ender, a name chosen with intent. Azarin had vowed that he and his weapon would bring an end to anything and anyone who dared to stand in their path. The spear hummed again, deep and resonant, as if speaking in its own ancient tongue. A moment later, Azarin's voice followed. Indeed, it's a remarkable ability, drawing strength by drinking the blood of the fallen to heal his wounds. I wonder if that rapier has any other abilities. Ender drifted around Azarin, its soft hum intensifying briefly. True, Azarin said with a nod and a smile. With talent like his, there's no way that blade only has a single ability. Then, as if moved by curiosity or amusement, Ender turned toward Zarek. It floated toward him and began to circle, humming softly as it did so. "It's nice to see you too, Ender," Zarek replied with a light chuckle. Though he responded, he understood none of what the spear conveyed. Only the bonded master could comprehend its voice. Its language was not made for others. Ender hummed again, its sound low and insistent. This time, Zarek didn't respond. He couldn't understand the weapon's language, so he simply turned his gaze toward Azarin, waiting for interpretation. "He's telling you to convince me to return and hunt down the sins," Azarin said dryly, sensing Zarek's stare on his back. "Apparently, he's had enough of us sitting around for over a week." Zarek wasn't the least bit surprised. Ender had always been battle-hungry. Whenever they weren't fighting, the spear would constantly badger Azarin, urging him to spar with the Dukes or find a new enemy worth its edge. Azarin didn't respond to the spear's complaints. He simply continued watching his son below, allowing Ender to pester Zarek in his place. Though pride filled his heart as he observed Asher, Azarin had sighed more than 30 times that afternoon alone. He had no interest in attending yet another empty celebration. Of course, his wife Lily occasionally dragged him to such events, but that was different. That was her. This, however, was just another gathering of bloated egos and idle chatter, where men flapped their tongues instead of swinging their weapons. Asher turned and walked back toward Lyra and the guards, all of whom stared at him as though he were a monster cloaked in human flesh. What they had just witnessed defied all logic, utterly impossible by their standards. The 10th son had actually emerged victorious? And not just victorious. He had triumphed without a shred of formal training or battlefield experience. It hadn't even been a full week since his awakening, and by protocol, he still had more than 3 weeks to go before he could be deemed eligible to face a single monster in the first training ground. What they had witnessed left them speechless, stunned into silence. None more so than Lyra, who stood frozen at the rear, still clutching Asher's coat in her hands. She had been by his side every day, before his awakening and even after, and yet she had never explicitly seen him train. She knew he was a genius. That much had been clear when he ascended 2 sub-life ranks as if it were nothing. But she had neither seen him personally train in the first training ground nor watched him train privately in his room afterward. Her gaze remained fixed on her charge as he approached. His breathing was steady, his stride composed. Those calm, purple eyes and hair made all the more vivid against the backdrop of crimson blood splattered across his form. The guards immediately stepped forward, speaking in unison. "Congratulations on your first battle and first kill, 10th Sunday." Asher turned his gaze toward them and offered a faint smile. "Thank you. My safety is in your hands. However, if we encounter any weak monsters along the way, leave them to me." For a moment, the guards stood in stunned silence. Did the 10th son just say, "Thank you"? The thought echoed in their minds, disbelief written across their faces. One of them quickly composed himself and responded, "Rest assured, 10th Sunday." He then turned to another guard and issued a swift order. "Set up a tent for the 10th son to freshen up. We'll resume the journey once he's ready." With practiced efficiency, a guard broke from formation and began assembling the tent without delay. After bathing and changing into a fresh set of clothes, Asher made his way back to the carriage. "Thank goodness I made Lyra pack a generous amount of my wardrobe into her space ring," he mused, recalling how he had selected some clothes for himself, only for Lyra to store them with her usual efficiency. The moment he settled into his seat, the carriage began to move once more. Up front, the coachman wore a far-off look, quietly lost in his thoughts as he guided the horses along the path. He was clearly fantasizing, perhaps imagining himself in battle. After all, who hadn't dreamed of standing on the battlefield, weapon in hand, forging their legacy? But reality had been less kind. He had failed all three of his awakening attempts. No Astra, no ability, just a regular man in a world of powers beyond reach. Inside the carriage, Asher had already settled into his usual routine. Eyes closed, his breathing steady and measured, he slipped into a meditative rhythm. His mind replayed the battle from beginning to end, each movement, each decision, each strike. He analyzed every moment with sharp focus, searching for flaws, missed opportunities, or anything he could have executed more effectively. This was his process, refining himself, even in stillness. Yet, despite his scrutiny, everything appeared seamless, flawless, even save for one moment: the pack leader's initial strike. That single exchange lingered in his mind, a slight imperfection in an otherwise immaculate performance. Lyra watched Asher intently as he sat in a lotus position, eyes closed, lost in quiet concentration. Her mind was ablaze with questions. She wasn't afraid to voice them, but she knew better than to interrupt what appeared to be training. Then, as though he had read her thoughts, Asher spoke without opening his eyes. "If you have any questions, feel free to ask. I'll answer them to the best of my abilities." He opened his eyes slowly, adjusting his posture as one leg folded over the other with ease. Lyra didn't hesitate. "Was that really your first battle, young master?" She already knew the answer, but she needed to hear it from him. Asher offered a small, confident smile. "I'm sure you already know it was, Lyra, but I'm just that talented, and I train hard enough to back it up." Lyra nodded slightly, then asked what truly intrigued her. "And those blood threads from earlier, what exactly were they?" She had her suspicions. The Wargrave family's weapons were known to possess unique and often terrifying abilities. But guessing wasn't enough. She needed confirmation. "That's Virilis's ability," Asher replied calmly. "It's called Crimson Pact. It heals me using the blood of those I kill." Lyra's eyes narrowed slightly in thought. She had never heard the name Virilis before, but she could safely assume it was the name of his rapier. With that, Lyra continued, asking more questions, curious about the other abilities Virilis might possess. Asher answered each one with a calm voice, withholding nothing. There was no real need to hide anything from her. After all, trust was the foundation of her role by his side. That said, he wasn't the type to share his secrets simply because someone asked. Openness didn't equate to carelessness. Even now, everything he had shared with Lyra remained confined within the four walls of the carriage. In noble circles, discretion was a discipline. Carriages were always reinforced with barriers or enchantments to ensure privacy, preventing even the most loyal guards from listening in. For nobles, conversations were as valuable as gold, and far more dangerous if overheard. And so, the journey continued. Asher passed the time in conversation with Lyra, the hours slipping by as their carriage rolled steadily forward. Whenever a monster was sighted along the way, Asher stepped out to confront it himself. For those beyond his current ability, a single guard effortlessly dispatched them. Frequent stops were made so Asher could cleanse himself of blood, a necessity that, while minor, extended the journey beyond its intended duration. Yet not a single complaint was uttered. How could they complain? They were witnessing something extraordinary, the 10th Son's growth unfolding right before their eyes. By the time they reached the capital, night had already fallen. The towering gates loomed ahead, bathed in the soft glow of enchanted lanterns. But the city guard stationed there made no move to halt the carriage for the customary inspection. The moment they laid eyes on the crest emblazoned on the carriage walls and the armor of the accompanying guards, they stood at attention and stepped aside in silence. Some insignias spoke louder than words, and this one demanded reverence. Asher and Lyra arrived at the most luxurious inn in the capital, a place so exclusive that a single room cost 100 gold coins per night. Without hesitation, Lyra paid for 2 rooms, one for Asher and the other for the coachman. She and the guards, however, did not seek rest. Instead, they took their positions outside Asher's door, ever vigilant, prepared to respond at a moment's notice to any threat or disturbance. As for the coachman, he was living a dream. Never in his life had he imagined stepping foot inside such an opulent establishment, let alone sleeping in a room worth 100 gold coins for a single night. Surrounded by silk sheets, golden fixtures, and velvet walls, he could only grin to himself. At this moment, he felt nothing less than royalty, a prince in borrowed splendor. The following morning arrived swiftly. Asher's eyes fluttered open, greeted by the soft caress of sunlight streaming through the window. He sat up slowly, stretching with a yawn, savoring the tranquil comfort of the moment. His gaze swept across the room, lavish in every detail, a testament to the opulence promised by its extravagant price of 100 gold coins. Yet, even in all its grandeur, it still paled in comparison to his room in the Wargrave estate. Asher remained seated on the bed for a brief moment before finally rising to his feet. Yet, the instant his soles touched the ground, a knock echoed sharply through the room. "Can I at least take a step before you knock, Lyra?" he thought, exhaling mentally in mild exasperation. "Come in, Lyra," he called out. The door opened with practiced grace, and Lyra entered, her expression composed, her smile gentle. "Good morning, young master. I trust you slept well?" she asked with quiet warmth. "I did indeed," Asher replied smoothly. "After all, sleeping in a forest and sleeping in a proper town are worlds apart. Wouldn't you agree?" Lyra's gaze softened, as though intuitively sensing the unspoken concern behind his words, the unease born from threats that lurked in the shadows. "Whatever may come, young master, know that we will always be by your side to protect you," she said with quiet conviction. Asher smiled faintly, a calmness in his eyes. "That much I know, Lyra. I have no doubt in your strength." During one of their conversations on the road to the capital, a pastime Asher often turned to whenever boredom set in. Given that weak beasts didn't appear with predictable frequency, he had casually inquired about Lyra's life rank. To his surprise, she revealed she had attained the Flare Firmstar life rank. Asher found it difficult to comprehend how someone of such strength served merely as a maid. The revelation stirred further curiosity in his mind. Just how powerful must Zarek be, the man known as the right hand of the Primarch? In truth, Asher had no real sense of their capabilities, whether it was Lyra, Zarek, or even the Primarch himself. None of them had ever demonstrated their strength in combat before him, let alone sparred. With a quiet sigh, Asher shook his head, dismissing the thoughts. There was no point dwelling on what he could not yet grasp. "What plans do we have for the day, Lyra?" Asher asked, settling himself before a mirror. His gaze lingered on his own reflection, a confident smile curling his lips as he quietly reaffirmed what he had long believed. His face was nothing short of a jackpot. "No plans, young master," Lyra replied calmly, standing with quiet poise at his side. "The royal party begins tomorrow. Until then, your schedule remains open. So, nothing to do but lounge indoors," Asher muttered, drumming his fingers lightly against the table before him. With a sigh, he rose from his seat and made his way to the bathroom for a quick rinse. As always, Lyra had anticipated his needs. The bath was already prepared. After a brief wash, Asher returned and dressed in a fresh set of clothes. Just as Lyra raised her hand to summon breakfast from her spatial ring, Asher gently stayed her motion. "I've just left the Wargrave estate for the first time since birth," he said, his tone thoughtful. "Let me explore what the capital has to offer, at least for today." Lyra paused, then offered a small nod of understanding. "Do we have a particular destination in mind, young master?" Lyra asked, her tone carrying a note of mild curiosity. "Not really," Asher replied with a faint shrug. "We'll simply walk around for now." In truth, he had no idea where anything was, but that hardly mattered. He intended to wander the capital aimlessly, taking in the sights before returning later. He supposed he could be spending the day training, refining his skills, and pushing his limits. But Asher believed firmly in balance. A life devoted solely to discipline, without moments of enjoyment, was hollow. Staring at himself in the mirror, Asher's figure literally screamed nobility. Not just any noble, definitely a prince or close. "Fetch me something simpler," he said, his voice calm, his gaze still fixed on the mirror. He had no intention of spending the day fending off stares from every direction like some rare creature on display. Today was meant for leisure, not spectacle. Still, that didn't mean he would stoop to wearing the attire of commoners. No, he would don garments befitting a noble, just ones of slightly lesser quality, enough to tone down the overwhelming impression of status and presence, if only by a little. He knew, of course, that his striking features alone would still draw attention. Some things, after all, couldn't be hidden. A few minutes later, Lyra returned with a set of simpler garments. Asher changed into them with measured ease, and once dressed, he lowered himself into a chair. "Call on the guard stationed outside," he said. Lyra gave a small nod and stepped out, returning moments later with the guards in tow. Clad in heavy armor and armed to the teeth, their presence was imposing, far too conspicuous for the kind of day Asher had in mind. The moment he saw them, Asher sighed inwardly. "If I walk around like this, I might as well carry a royal banner while I'm at it. I'll be exploring a portion of the capital today," he began, his voice even. "I understand your duty is to protect me, but I prefer not to attract the entire city's attention while doing so." He let his words sink in for a breath before continuing. "So today, you'll change into plain normal attire. You'll follow from a distance, discreetly, each of you positioned separately throughout the area. I want your protection, but without the announcement." His tone was clear but not unkind, firm yet trusting. The guards, understanding his words, nodded. Asher told them to head to the bathroom and change there. Turning to Lyra, he spoke, "You too. You won't be wearing your maid clothes today. Also, you wouldn't walk a step behind me. You will walk beside me today." Lyra gave a nod of acknowledgement, then vanished. Within 3 seconds, she reappeared dressed in an entirely different outfit. "How much coin do we have to spend?" Asher asked, unwilling to risk emptying his pockets before the day was over. "I was entrusted with 3 platinum coins prior to our departure," Lyra replied with a calm tone. Asher's steps came to an abrupt halt at the mention of the sum. 3 platinum coins? Truly the mark of a duke's household, to hand out such wealth as if it were common produce. Still, who am I to complain? With that thought, he resumed walking. "Don't forget to bring the coachman along," Asher said as he stepped out. "Our first task today is simple. Sample the cuisine this hotel and has to offer. Everyone's ordering." Lyra walked to his side with casual ease, just as he had instructed. The guards, for now, moved like ordinary travelers, unassuming, unremarkable. But the moment they stepped beyond the inn's threshold, their roles would shift. From that point forward, their duty to protect would begin in earnest. With Lyra walking gracefully at his right and the coachman at his left, Asher descended the stairs at a measured pace. His eyes flicked briefly toward the coachman, noting with faint amusement the man's surprisingly improved hygiene and the unmissable smoothness of his skin, an overnight transformation that did not go unnoticed. Upon reaching the front counter, the attendant straightened with practiced poise and greeted them at once. "Good morning, young master, madam, sirs. How may I be of service?" The attendant's tone was exceptionally courteous, as expected. After all, anyone capable of affording 100 gold coins per night was either nobility, closely tied to one, or simply wealthy enough to stand among them. "Let's see the food menu," Asher said calmly. With a respectful nod, the attendant lowered his hand beneath the counter, retrieved a neatly folded menu, and presented it to Asher with both hands. Asher studied it for a moment, his gaze skimming over the elegantly listed options. Then, with a tone of quiet decisiveness, he began to order. "For the main course, I'll have the lamb cutlets with minted pea puree. As for the sides, bring the rosemary and sea salt flatbread. And for the wine, aged blackberry mead should suffice." Truth be told, he hadn't heard of any of these dishes before, but the countless memories embedded within him, filled with knowledge of exotic cuisines and refined palates, made the act of ordering appear effortless. Asher passed the menu to the coachman at his side, who accepted it with a smile that bordered on familiarity. Normally, someone of his station would never stand so close, let alone behave so casually around a sun or a moon. But after 3 days in Asher's company, he had drawn his own quiet conclusion. This young master was unlike the others. Even the guards had come to recognize the subtle but undeniable difference in him. Lyra, too, had noticed the shift. Ever since Asher emerged from his year-long lockup, there was something altered in his demeanor, calmer perhaps, but also very different. She chalked it up to his self-imposed isolation, to the scars solitude often leaves behind. Besides, what right did she have to question the change in him? She was, after all, merely his maid. The coachman wasted no time, ordering a veritable feast without the slightest hesitation. Even Asher raised an eyebrow, mildly concerned whether the man would be able to walk after consuming so much. As for himself, Asher had intentionally chosen something lighter. He intended to explore the city's streets later, sampling whatever local delicacies happened to catch his eye. "How much?" Asher asked, his tone casual but measured. "Breakfasts are included with your stay, young master," the attendant replied courteously. With a slight nod, Asher turned without another word and made his way to a nearby table, taking a seat with the quiet assurance of someone used to being served. The others followed suit. Within minutes, a procession of dishes began to arrive, each plated with meticulous care and aromatic finesse. Everyone dug in. The coachman, overwhelmed by the flavors, ate with such enthusiasm that he teared up at one point, a moment both comical and oddly touching. The guards, however, remained composed and unaffected. It was clear they were accustomed to cuisine of this standard, likely a regular indulgence during their time stationed at the Wargrave estate. Once the meal concluded, Asher rose from his seat, prompting the others to follow. His gaze drifted to the coachman, whose bloated stomach made each step a struggle. With a faint hint of amusement, Asher offered a simple directive: return to your room and rest. "You've earned it." Although Asher had initially considered slipping the man a gold coin and letting him explore the city on his own later, he thought better of it. Who knew what kind of trouble the coachman might stumble into? He might very well go courting death before sundown. It was far safer to have him remain behind, tucked away in his room for the rest of the day. The coachman didn't object. With a contented sigh and a hand resting on his swollen belly, he turned on his heel and trudged back upstairs without protest. Shaking his head in quiet amusement, Asher stepped out of the inn with a composed yet eager stride. Though calm on the surface, there was a spark of anticipation in his eyes. He was finally ready to see the capital for himself. The moment he crossed the threshold, the world seemed to erupt around him. The capital overwhelmed his senses. A cacophony of sound washed over him: animated chatter, the creak of wheels, the clatter of hooves, and the occasional bark of a vendor hawking goods. Voices mingled from every direction, a living symphony of life and motion. People of all shapes, heights, and social standing wove through the crowded streets. Merchants negotiating prices, nobles flanked by guards, children darting between legs with laughter. Carriages rumbled past, some drawn by fine-bred horses bearing elegantly dressed passengers, others tugged by sturdy beasts of burden laden with crates, barrels, and sacks of wares. The architecture was no less varied. Houses and shops stretched outward and upward, crafted in an array of styles. Some were simple stone dwellings with timber frames. Others boasted ornate facades with carved detailing and painted glass. The capital pulsed with vibrant diversity, each corner holding its own flavor. Asher strode forward with quiet eagerness, Lyra walking in step beside him. The guards had already melted into the surroundings, dispersed among the crowd, their watchful eyes tracking his every move, poised to respond at a moment's notice. His gaze swept over each building and stall, a flicker of curiosity dancing in his eyes, an expression like a commoner who had just left the village for the first time and entered the capital by seemingly sheer luck. "Come, Lyra, there's a world of flavors waiting," Asher said, his pace quickening with sudden enthusiasm. Since when did the young master become a connoisseur of cuisine? Lyra mused silently, yet fell in a step without protest. Asher approached a roadside stall where the aroma of grilled meat lingered thick in the air. Skewers of various kinds sizzled enticingly over open flames. Behind the stall stood a middle-aged man, clad in a well-worn apron, who beamed the moment he caught sight of Asher. "Young man, what'll it be?" the vendor asked with practiced cheer. "I've got it all: spiced mutton skewers, chicken liver with onion, pork belly bites. 2 coppers apiece." Asher's eyes danced across the offerings, each one more tempting than the last. Without hesitation, he replied, "I'll have 2 of each." Wealth had its privileges. Why limit himself with choices? The vendor nodded eagerly, his morning already made. 12 copper coins before noon. Fortune was smiling today. He wrapped the skewers in parchment with swift efficiency and handed them over. Fortunately, by some stroke of grace, Lyra had small change on her. Asher was spared the awkwardness of tossing a gold coin at a street vendor and waiting for change that likely didn't exist. Skewers in hand, Asher and Lyra strolled onward, sampling as they walked. A smile bloomed on Asher's face, bright, boyish, unrestrained, as he moved from stall to stall, indulging in every delicacy that caught his eye. At one point, Asher wandered into an adventurer's guild, more out of curiosity than purpose. He wanted to see the famed mission board and observe the so-called adventurers who seemed to spend more time drowning themselves in ale than accepting actual assignments. Naturally, a few among them tried to assert dominance, throwing hostile glances and muttering threats under their breath. Asher, however, remained utterly unfazed. He gave a slight nod to Lyra, who responded with casual brutality, putting a few of them in their place by smashing chairs and splintering tables over their heads. The guild hall rang with the clatter of collapsing furniture and groans of regret. Wasn't fighting in the Hall of the Adventurer Guild the hallmark of every reincarnated beginner adventurer? He was just placing his mark. After a moment of studying the mission board, more to amuse himself than anything else, Asher stepped back out, satisfied. His next destination, the shopping and clothing district, a sector typically reserved for nobles. Though his wardrobe was already well stocked, that minor detail didn't deter him. Today, Asher intended to burn through 2 platinum coins. After all, tomorrow would be spent enduring the company of those pompous, jewel-draped peacocks called nobles. He would depart the day after, and saw no point in conserving the generous funds gifted to him. Naturally, word of Asher's lavish spending didn't go unnoticed. Along the way, a few desperate souls, street thugs hoping for an easy payday, attempted to strike it rich at his expense. Unfortunately for them, they never made it within striking distance. The guards, ever watchful though unseen, dealt with them swiftly and silently, leaving not even a ripple in Asher's peaceful excursion. By the time he returned to the inn, night had already settled over the capital, its streets bathed in the soft glow of lantern light. He paid once more for his room, without hesitation or concern, before dragging himself upstairs, stomach bloated from a day of unrestrained indulgence, not unlike the coachman's earlier feast. He collapsed onto his bed with the unbothered ease of a man who had conquered a kingdom of food and frivolity. A contented smile curved his lips as sleep claimed him, the day's memories still warm in his mind. The next day gently arrived. It was the day of the royal party. The royal party was scheduled for 10 a.m. in the morning, but at this time, Asher still hadn't made his way to the palace yet. He was still dressing up after having breakfast. After all, no party that was set for a particular hour ever truly began at that exact time. Asher stood before a mirror, dressed in a refined combination of blue, ash, and black cloth. If there were a charm stat on his system, it would simply read infinity at this point. After spraying the perfume he had bought the day before, Asher called out, "Lyra." Hearing her name, Lyra stepped into the room. "Yes, young master," she replied with gentle respect. "Is everything and everyone ready yet?" Asher asked as his gaze turned to meet hers. "Everything is ready. We're just waiting on you," "Young master," Lyra answered calmly. Asher nodded with composure, then began walking toward the door with steady, measured steps. Lyra swiftly moved ahead and opened it. "Good afternoon, 10th son." The 5 guards stationed outside greeted him in unison. Asher nodded slightly, his eyes briefly scanning their new armor. However, he didn't comment on it. He simply continued walking downstairs, heading toward the waiting carriage. Those seated downstairs in the inn's dining area froze the moment they noticed the guards walking behind a young boy. The instant their eyes caught the insignias on the guard's armor and the emblem on the boy's chest, they all swallowed hard, a singular thought echoing through their minds. A son. Asher didn't speak to anyone. His presence alone commanded attention, like a magnetic force. Though everyone within this inn was wealthy and well-connected, after all, this was one of the finest inns in the capital. Who could possibly be more wealthy and connected than a duke? Asher stepped out of the building, and the coachman was already waiting behind the horse. His attire had been upgraded to match the significance of the event. The Wargrave household had even purchased him new clothing to ensure he would not be looked down upon in any aspect. "Good afternoon, 10th son," the coachman greeted with a respectful bow. Asher paused and looked at the man, then asked, "I hope you aren't having any health issues?" It immediately clicked in the coachman's mind that Asher was referring to his bloated stomach from yesterday. He bowed again, responding, "My health has no issues, 10th Sunday." Asher gave a small nod before entering the carriage. This time, however, Lyra did not join him inside. Instead, she mounted another horse and followed from behind, maintaining the formation. Asher gazed out the window as the carriage rolled forward toward the palace. From anywhere within the capital, the palace was visible. It almost seemed like it was situated atop a mountain, making it appear elevated and majestic, but it wasn't. It was just that massive. On the way, Asher encountered numerous carriages of various shapes, designs, and levels of opulence. However, he didn't recognize any of the insignias decorating them. He hadn't read about them in the library and so paid them little mind. Because it was a royal party, a gridlock had formed near the palace gates, as too many nobles and individuals of importance were arriving one after another. At this point, Asher had already closed the window and now sat alone in the silence of the carriage, his eyes closed in silence. Several minutes later, the carriage came to a stop. A guard quickly dismounted from his horse and gently knocked on the carriage door to signal their arrival, then carefully opened it. Hearing the creak of the carriage door, Asher's entire demeanor shifted. His face became neutral, expressionless. His posture relaxed, yet his bearing transformed into one that spoke of noble lineage and quiet authority. He was mimicking what he had observed during his awakening, the way the suns, moons, and other members of the Wargrave family carried themselves. This was a royal party, after all. He could not afford to appear lesser. And besides, he didn't know anyone well enough to be smiling idly at them. Rising from his seat with a graceful calmness, Asher stepped down from the carriage, now completely surrounded by his guards. The view before him was overwhelming. The entire royal palace lay stretched before his eyes. Tall, regal, magnetic, powerful. The structure looked as though it could pull in all eyes simply by existing. His eyes trailed along the magnificent buildings that spiraled outward from the main palace. Everything seemed crafted from rare stones or precious materials. The opulence here was in a league of its own. Even the Wargrave estate seemed modest, perhaps even poor, compared to the grandeur laid bare before him. Though the view left Asher momentarily stunned, as even the Wargrave estate wasn't this extravagant, his face remained perfectly impassive. Truly, there are levels to wealth, Asher thought. His purple eyes flicked around, noticing a few carriages lined up behind his, but none in front. He then turned his gaze forward to where a grand door stood in the distance. With calm, confident strides, he moved forward. Behind him, the guards and carriages began to roll forward, peeling away from their location as though heading toward a garage or holding area. Asher continued walking. From the carriages behind, he felt the weight of eyes watching his back, but he didn't falter. When he finally arrived at the door that appeared to lead into the banquet hall, the two butlers standing guard prepared to ask for identification. But as soon as they spotted the insignia on his chest, their eyes lit up with recognition. They had been informed ahead of time that the 10th son of the Wargrave household would be attending. The guest list had been meticulously prepared, after all. They didn't dare question his identity. With swift, rehearsed motions, they bowed in his direction. Then, turning toward the banquet hall, their unified voices echoed through the chamber with startling clarity and power. Asher Wargrave, 10th son of the ducal Wargrave household, has arrived. Hearing the formal announcement, Asher could only sigh internally. Nobles are really ostentatious, he couldn't help but think. Regardless of what he felt, he took the next step forward into the hall. Nobles and those of importance were always announced before they stepped into the banquet hall. This was a sign of respect and tradition that had existed for generations. However, only those from noble households were ever given this honor. Merchants were never announced. After all they had was money, and that was something every noble possessed in abundance. As for individuals outside the noble hierarchy who were still deemed important enough to be announced, they were powerful figures, beings like Lily of the Abyss. After all, in this world, power stood above money, status, and bloodline. Inside the grand banquet hall, conversations flowed freely as nobles mingled, formed connections, and strengthened alliances. Every so often, a new name would echo through the hall, prompting some heads to turn in curiosity, while others didn't even bother as they stood above the name that was announced. And at that moment, the voices of the two butlers stationed at the entrance rang clearly across the vast chamber, cutting through all ambient noise. Asher Wargrave, 10th son of the ducal Wargrave household, has arrived. As their brains registered the name, every single voice in the hall fell silent. Not a whisper remained. A pin-drop silence reigned supreme, so heavy it felt like the very air had frozen in reverence or perhaps shock. Then a sound came. It wasn't loud. It was soft, subtle, but somehow it rang louder than any shout at that moment. It was the sound of a footfall, then another, and another. Steps that should have gone silent the moment it hit the ground, now echoed like a divine command, drawing every gaze forward as if the will of the world itself demanded attention. All eyes turned instantly to the entrance. There they saw him, a boy, no older than 17, standing tall at 6 feet 3 inches, walking with regal composure, as if he were the emperor of the Zerathorn Empire himself. His purple hair was perfectly arranged, sitting atop his head like a crown. A flawless hairline framed his forehead, catching and reflecting the light of the hall in mesmerizing patterns. His deep purple eyes, a mirror of his hair, were calmer than any still lake. A perfectly built, athletic body spoke volumes of his physique without needing words. His presence alone devoured attention like a black hole swallows light. No one could look away. It wasn't just his lineage, they were all staring at him. Everyone watched, stunned. They didn't believe their eyes. They couldn't believe their eyes. A member of the Duke family. Not just any member, a son. And not just any son, the failed son. The disgrace of the Wargrave. They all knew who he was. They had all heard about him. Every descendant of the Wargrave family was a genius in their own right. That streak had gone unbroken for generations, until Asher, the youngest heir who had failed his awakening twice. When Asher underwent his third and final awakening, it wasn't just the Wargrave family who listened in. Nobles, powerhouses, and those of status had tuned in, curious and cautious. If Asher failed, it would mark the beginning of the Wargrave's slow and subtle decline. Even if it was just a spark, small and seemingly insignificant, no one knew what kind of flame it might ignite in the future. Ansem, that was the shared thought that echoed through everyone's minds. They had never seen the 10th son before, and certainly not someone so striking. Even though he was widely known as a failure, few were foolish enough to look down on him openly. He may have awakened on his third attempt, and his future might be limited in the eyes of many, but he was still a Wargrave. He still had monsters of unimaginable strength backing him. So unless one had equal status, any scorn or disdain was best buried deep within the heart. In truth, many didn't even care that he had failed his awakening. Thousands failed to awaken every single year. Not everyone was destined for greatness. As Asher walked into the hall, he could feel their stares drilling into his back like invisible spears. He had expected this. Wherever he went, people would always stare because he was the son of a duke. And now, they stared harder because he was the failed heir. He continued walking calmly, eyes subtly scanning the hall as he searched for a place to sit and observe the event. The number of chandeliers hanging from the ceiling just to light up one hall is ridiculous, he thought as his gaze moved upward. Eventually, Asher found seat. But before he could sit down, he heard the soft, deliberate sound of footsteps approaching from behind. He turned his head slightly, only to see a beautiful girl walking toward him, standing at about 5 feet 7 inches, her elegant stride filled with trained grace. She reached him and smiled warmly. "Enjoying the view, 10th son?" she asked, her tone light and inviting. Asher's expression remained impassive as he replied calmly, "Isn't it normal to introduce yourself before striking up a conversation?" "Indeed," she answered, her smile widening. "My name is Darisa Camber, first and only child of Marquis Darian Camber." "A marquis, huh?" Asher thought. In terms of noble rank, they sit just below the emperor and the dukes. Although Darisa was the sole heir of her household, Crymora operated under merit rather than gender. Male or female, it made no difference. The world didn't discriminate. Power was the only thing that mattered. Seeing her smile and properly introduce herself, Asher's expression softened. His impassive face shifted into a slight smile as he responded. "Asher Wargrave, 10th child of the Wargrave household." Darisa was momentarily surprised to see him smile. She had expected to look at his impassive face all day. After all, it was said that the Wargraves never smiled. As the only heir of a marquis household, she had studied the empire in depth, especially the 4 dukes. Her family didn't side with any particular duke. Instead, they maintained good relationships with all of them. As a noble, Darisa had perfect control over her facial expressions. She didn't let her surprise show. She simply smiled back, and the conversation began to flow naturally between them. Though Asher was considered a failure by many, he still bore the name of Wargrave. More importantly, he couldn't be married off to just anyone due to his family's rigid traditional rules. Darisa Camber knew this well, and that was why she didn't hesitate to step forward, to make the first move, to be the first connection. Others soon came to the same realization. In an instant, several nobles began to flock toward Asher, each one eager to make an impression and build a relationship with the 10th son. Asher could only sigh inwardly as he continued greeting them one by one, hearing name after name. He knew that once he saw a person's face and heard their name even once, he would never forget them. His brain had a knack for never forgetting anything, which always worked against him in moments like these. "Time to see if there are any changes to my stats, since I feel subtly stronger," Asher thought with a smile. "Status," Asher commanded. "Name," Asher Wargrave. "Age," 17. "Bloodline," the Wargrave lineage. "Physique," absolute physique. "Titles," youngest heir, 10th son, disgrace of the Wargrave. "Unique body holder." "Life rank," faint star. "Sub-life rank," flare. "Affinity," lightning. "Strength," 57-58. "Agility," 57-59. "Vitality," 58. "Perception," 52-60. Asher's eyes swept across the changes, analyzing each with growing interest. His strength had risen by a single point expected, given his recent physical exertion. Agility, however, had improved by 2, a direct result of his intensive movement and balance training. Vitality hasn't increased, which was understandable. What truly stunned Asher, however, was his perception stat. It hadn't just improved, it had soared, leaping from the lowest stat to the highest in a single bound, now standing at an impressive 60 points. He could feel the difference. His senses had sharpened considerably, and his omni-perception now extended to a 6-meter radius. Looks like having arrows constantly fired at me actually paid off, he mused wryly. Asher smiled. In just a few hours of training, his progress had been remarkable. His thoughts drifted to his absolute physique, the ability limitless physical growth, an ability that allowed his body to grow endlessly through combat and training. Even without formal cultivation, as long as he pushed himself to the edge, whether through battle or relentless drills, he would shatter that edge and grow stronger in response. Truly broken. But Asher understood the truth behind it. While the concept seemed straightforward, the reality was far more brutal. The stronger one became, the more punishing it was to break past the next threshold. Each new limit was a wall steeper than the last. But that was a concern for another time. Why waste thought on hurdles that weren't yet in his path? Asher immediately settled onto his bed in a lotus position, his eyes closing with practiced ease. Without delay, he began cultivating. Streams of astra in the air stirred, flowing through his pores and coursing directly into his astra veins with rhythmic precision. Just because the first training ground didn't officially allocate time for cultivation didn't mean he would neglect it. He would carve out his own path, even in silence. Hours slipped by unnoticed, and soon it was already 1 a.m. System, is it possible for you to tell me the time? Asher asked as he opened his eyes. Throughout his cultivation, he had opened his eyes several times, checking the clock intermittently. He had set a strict boundary. Cultivation would end at 1 a.m., at which point he would shift into the next phase of his training. The system remained silent. Whether it was genuinely speechless at Asher's attempt to turn it into an alarm clock, or simply unwilling to respond, he couldn't tell. Just as he was about to rise from his bed, the familiar chime finally echoed in his mind, like the reluctant sigh of an overworked assistant pushed into unpaid overtime. Ding! It is possible, host. Asher glanced at the message, a smile tugging at his lips. He gave a small nod of acknowledgement. I'm about to begin my lightning training. It'll only last an hour. End time is 2 a.m. sharp. Notify me. After a short pause, the system responded. Affirmative, host. Asher stared at the ellipses preceding the message, brows twitching slightly. This lazy system, he muttered with a shake of his head. No time to waste. Climbing down from his bed, Asher raised his hand, and crackling lightning surged to life around his fingers. With a focused breath, he willed the energy to flow downward, guiding it from his fingertips to his palm. The lightning arcs brightened, pulsing with a vibrant, sharpened hue as they followed his intent. Drawing upon the fundamentals of his Astra control training, Asher attempted to compress the energy into a sphere, a lightning ball. Within seconds, the orb began to take shape, humming softly with unstable power. He didn't pause to celebrate the minor success. Compared to the vast array of overwhelming abilities he had read about or witnessed, a mere lightning ball felt almost laughable. Without hesitation, he moved on, trying to refine its form. He focused on condensing the sphere, willing it to solidify, then experimented with its size, enlarging it, then shrinking it, only to expand it again. Then suddenly, boom. The unstable lightning ball detonated in front of his face, sending a mild shockwave that instantly blasted his hair upward, transforming it into a wildly spiked mess. In a flash, Virilis materialized beside him, as if asking what was wrong with his control. There's still progress to be made, Asher mused, his eyes narrowing with determination. He didn't relent. Instead, he pressed on, continuing his training with sharp focus. Harnessing his control, Asher began shaping the lightning into rudimentary forms, spheres, lines, crude edges, though most wavered with instability. Still, within mere minutes, the raw potential began to settle. The shapes grew more defined, less volatile. His rapid improvement was undeniable, a testament to both his talent and tenacity. I wonder how long it took others to reach this point, he pondered briefly. But the thought was fleeting. No matter. That has nothing to do with me. System, how much time remains? I've already completed the basics, and it still hasn't been an hour. 10 minutes left, host. Since I've wrapped up the fundamentals of lightning control, let's test something else. With purpose in his step, Asher turned and made his way toward the bathroom. He had long since set his sights on walking on water. If walking on walls is possible, he reasoned, then why not water? The instructor may not have taught it, but that didn't mean it was impossible or that Asher couldn't be the first to do it. With that thought, he filled a wide, tub-like structure to the brim. Channeling Astra into his feet, he took a deliberate step toward the water's surface, only for his foot to plunge straight to the bottom. Just as I suspected, he thought calmly, unbothered. The Astra control method for walking on walls clearly didn't translate to water, and he had intentionally used the same approach to confirm his theory. A slow smile curved his lips as he withdrew his foot. The Astra beneath him shifted under his thought and control. With this new method, he took another step. This time, his foot landed atop the water's surface, steady and undisturbed, not even a ripple. Rising slightly, he placed his other foot beside the first. It too held firm. The smile on his face widened into a grin. How many movie superheroes from my previous life could even dream of doing this? His first failure had sparked a revelation. Walls were solid. Water was liquid, their properties opposites. So why not reverse the control method as well? It had worked perfectly. Host, it's time. The system's notification echoed in his mind. Still grinning, Asher stepped off the water and made his way back to bed. Whether he would actually sleep, with excitement surging through every fiber of his being, was another matter entirely. Asher continued to stand alone as he watched the party. When is a face-slapping moment going to happen? Or were all those authors just lying? Although it's understandable, nobles only act high and mighty against commoners, Asher thought with a sigh, as he really wanted to see a face-slapping moment. I never thought the 10th son himself would come personally for my birthday party. Asher heard a voice from behind. He turned, his gaze landing on the figure walking towards him, the princess of the Zerathorn Empire, Valra Lux Vanthelmore. Would you have preferred another son in attendance or a moon, Princess Valra? Asher replied with an expressionless face. Valra simply smiled as she spoke. I do not know any sun or moon in particular. Besides, neither of them are my age. Unlike you, who is 17 like me. Asher simply nodded as they continued to talk. So, what do you think of the party, Asher, if I'm permitted to call you by name? Valra continued with a smile. Of course, you are, Your Highness, Asher replied, his own smile appearing. Please call me Valra, Valra simply stated. Asher simply nodded. Valra, the party is kind of fun, although I've never been to one to actually know that. Is that so? I personally think it's boring. I'm not into these kinds of things. But my brother wanted it. He sees it as an opportunity to strengthen the bond between the Empire and its people. Valra walked gently as she spoke. The music rose gently as people began to dance to the tunes. Aren't you going to ask a lady to a dance, Asher? Valra spoke as her brown eyes stared into his purple eyes. She raised her hand, expecting him to take it. Asher smiled, his form lowered as he took her hand gently and kissed the back of her hand as he spoke. It will be an honor to dance with the princess of the Zerathorn Empire. But before Asher could even take a step, someone walked up to him and Valra with calm strides. Allow me this dance, Princess Valra. The boy bowed with respect, his hand on his chest. Maybe another time. I'm already set to dance with the 10th son of the Wargrave. Valra declined with easing composure. As Asher and Valra were about to walk away, the boy spoke again. Your Highness, the 10th son is the failure of the Wargrave family. You can't be seen dancing with him, or it might indirectly affect your own image. Valra instantly paused and turned, her smile gone as she replied, Ryan Silvershade, are you telling me who to dance with at my own party? Her tone dropped the more she spoke. I know I wished for a face-slapping moment, but for it to turn out this way is really unexpected, Asher thought as he watched in amusement. I'm not, Your Highness. I'm merely stating the facts. A genius such as yourself can't be with a failure who only awakened on his third awakening despite the blood that runs through his veins, Ryan replied, his black eyes meeting the princess's brown eyes. But before Valra could even speak, Asher replied, Aren't you the son of a duke? Ryan's eyes turned to Asher as he replied, I am. Then tell me, why are you so desperate for attention at this moment? Asher spoke, his purple gaze fixed on the boy before him. The princess can't just be southeast. Before Ryan could even finish, Asher cut him off. Are you the emperor that you can order around the princess? But before Ryan could reply, a voice came from the side. It seems some idiot sees my sister as a path to power. It was the prince, Vaelric Lux Vanthelmore. Ryan instantly frowned. He had only wanted to dance with the princess first, then build connections. He didn't want some no-name dancing with her. Ryan's silver shade. I will be having a word with the Duke about this. Vaelric spoke as he arrived. His gaze shifted to Asher, then to his sister. Let's go. Asher, Vaelric spoke, her smile returning as they stepped onto the dance floor. Asher didn't know how to dance, but he could from the original Asher's memories. He simply followed the memories and the princess's movements and mastered it on the fly. I'm sorry for such a sight, Vaelric spoke as she moved. I never thought I would hear a princess apologize. Asher spoke calmly as they both moved to the rhythm of the tune being played. And I never thought a wargrave could dance or smile, Vaelric replied with a chuckle. Just because the wargraves are only known for their battle prowess doesn't mean we aren't good at any other thing, Asher replied in a calm tone. Vaelric's gaze shifted to Ryan as she spoke. You seemed ready to fight him for me despite knowing you would lose, her tone teasing. I was never going to fight for you, Vaelric. Besides, who said I would lose? Asher stated calmly as he spun the princess around, his hand interlocked with hers. I never thought I would hear the day someone would say they wouldn't fight for me, Vaelric simply replied, the smile on her face ever present. She wasn't angry at Asher's words. After all, why should Asher fight for someone he just met? Even if she was the princess of the empire, even she wasn't that naive. Asher simply smiled and didn't reply. He simply stated the truth. He had no need to fight over a woman barely a week after his transmigration. Why do you think you wouldn't lose? Ryan has been training since he was 5. I do not think you can match up, Vaelric continued to speak. Let's just say, despite my third awakening, I remain a wargrave, Vaelric, Asher replied, having no time to list what made him confident. The tune came to an end, and they both came to a halt as they stopped dancing. It was a nice interaction. I hope we meet again. Of course. That is if you survive your true awakening. Vaelric spoke as she walked away, moving to interact with other nobles. Asher simply shook his head. He headed towards the door, ready to call it a day. Since no face slapping really happened, he had no reason to be here. Lyra, who had her gaze fixed at the door waiting for her young master, instantly called the coachman the moment she saw Asher. The carriage arrived at the front. Stepping in, Asher simply left, having no intention of remaining here. 2 days were wasted without training. He had better things to do. Before Asher's carriage could even roll away, a figure instantly appeared in front of it, making the coachman halt the carriage abruptly. Before the figure could even utter a word, he was instantly surrounded by the 5 guards and Lyra, all of whom had already drawn their weapons and stood in a battle-ready stance, prepared for combat without hesitation. The figure they surrounded was wearing a butler's uniform. They assumed he might be a servant of the palace, perhaps a real butler. But at the end of the day, that was still a huge might. There was a chance he could be an enemy in disguise, and none of them were willing to take such a risk lightly. Who are you, and what do you want? Lyra's voice rang out. The soft, gentle voice she reserved for Asher was nowhere to be found. Her tone was ice-cold, matching her sharp and unreadable expression. She recognized the butler. After all, her eyes had been fixed on the entrance of the banquet hall from the moment Asher stepped into it. She knew the figure before them was one of the 2 butlers who had been announcing nobles and people of importance as they arrived at the banquet hall. But Lyra couldn't care less about that fact at the moment. Recognition meant nothing in a place where betrayal could lurk behind familiar faces. The butler simply bowed, his right hand pressed to his chest, and his left hand placed respectfully behind his waist. He spoke with formal grace and calm respect. Pardon my intrusion, Knights of Wargrave, but the Emperor demands the 10th son's presence. At the mention of the Emperor, Lyra and the knights instantly frowned. After all, the man presided over the entire empire. To disobey his orders would be nothing short of treason. Still, Lyra didn't budge. She remained unmoved as she replied coldly, "Without a royal order, we aren't obligated to do anything. At the count of 3, if you are still blocking our path, you'll be seen as an assassin." At Lyra's words, the knights readied themselves again. Although they were still within the royal palace, and the royal knights were supposed to be responsible for this ground, they didn't trust anyone beyond their circle. 1. Lyra started counting. 2. No need to cause a scene at the royal party. Lyra. Asher's voice came calmly from the carriage as he stepped out with composed strides. 10th son, we can't be sure he was actually sent by the emperor himself. One of the knights immediately spoke, his figure materializing beside Asher just in case an arrow were to shoot out of nowhere. The knight's instincts had been sharpened by years of service. "Lead the way," Asher simply said to the butler, paying no attention to the surrounding tension. Turning to Lyra and the knights, he spoke once more. "You've done well for the day. I will be back." With those words, he walked back toward the banquet hall with steady steps. A few minutes earlier, above the grand banquet hall where the royal party was being held, various beings stood silently, gazing down at those who drank, conversed, and laughed below them. Asher's instincts had been right all along. The main royal party was indeed being held above the crowd. In this elevated place, nobles of all ranks gathered in silent splendor, discussing matters of power and legacy. From barons to dukes, even the emperor himself was present, his aura commanding. Outside of the noble class, no one else had access to this floor. This particular gathering was exclusively reserved for the nobility, under the direct orders of the emperor himself. "Your son has good senses," Emperor Zolthamir Lux Vanfilmore remarked as his eyes locked with Asher's through the enchanted glass that separated the upper floor from the lower. From below, no one could see anything above, but from above, they could see everything below, every motion, every word, every shift and expression. Duke Azarin Wargrave didn't reply. He simply stood there, gazing down silently at Asher with an expressionless face that betrayed no emotion. At that moment, although all nobles of the empire were gathered on the upper floor, they did not stand as one group. After the formal greetings had been exchanged and pleasantries shared, the nobles naturally separated into smaller factions. Barons and baronesses stood together with a few viscounts and viscountesses in one corner. Counts and countesses gathered with marquises and marchionesses at another side of the hall, discussing matters of trade, territory, and politics. Dukes and duchesses stood near the emperor in another direction, engaging in deeper conversation, likely regarding the empire's grander interests. Although they were all nobles and were technically gathered in one place, there was an unmistakable and rigid division in power, status, and influence. Who knows? He could just be admiring the glass ceiling from below. Duke Rydian Silvershade said with a faint smile. Still, Duke Azarin said nothing. He did not defend Asher, nor did he offer any explanation. He simply took another slow sip from the wine glass in his hand, as though Asher wasn't even his son. If it hadn't been the emperor's personal invitation, none of them would have come, not the dukes, not the marquises, not even most of the counts. Perhaps a few viscounts or barons would have come in hopes of forming connections and strengthening their households, but the higher nobility rarely mingled without purpose. As the nobles continued observing their descendants below, the scene began to shift. Ryan had just approached Faelra, who seemed eager to dance. Smiles appeared on the faces of some of the nobles, some amused, others eager to see how the situation would unfold. They wanted to see if Asher would react like a typical Wargrave, impulsive, proud, quick to face confrontation without asking questions. But when they saw him refrain from even drawing his weapon, their anticipation quickly turned to disappointment. They had been expecting a spectacle. "It seems your son, Asher, knows he isn't on par with Ryan Silvershade and decided to back down," Duchess Sivrian Stormvale commented from the side, her tone almost approving. "It seems your family isn't made up of only brutes after all. That was disappointing. I expected the usual arrogance and reckless display of youth." Duke Mavrek Ravencroft replied as he casually fed and patted a crow that rested eagerly on his lap. The creature wasn't a summon or a tamed beast. The Ravencrofts simply had a natural affinity with animals. They gravitated toward them instinctively. They watched as Asher danced with Vaelra. Then, quite suddenly, Duke Rydian Silvershade spoke. "How about a bet, Azarin?" Duke Rydian's gaze turned to Azarin, who still seemed unbothered. Curious gazes turned to him from all corners of the hall, wondering what he was about to propose. Seeing that Azarin didn't reply, Duke Rydian continued speaking, a wide grin forming on his lips. "A spar between our sons. As for the stakes, let's say 10% of our family's yearly earnings." His words struck like a bomb in the hall. Even nobles who weren't part of the conversation had been listening, and now they turned in surprise. 10% of a ducal household's annual income amounted to thousands of platinum coins. And Duke Rydian Silvershade had just placed that down for a simple bet. However, he had the advantage. Ryan had awakened at 15 and had received training even before that. The Silvershade family always knew what their children would awaken as bone manipulators. Unlike the Wargraves, who could not train beforehand because their weapon and elemental affinities awakened randomly with each descendant. Adding to the fact that Asher had only just awakened, and at 17, no less, Duke Azarin stood no real chance of winning this bet. Everyone in the room knew it. Now, all eyes turned to Duke Azarin. Would he accept out of pride and lose a fortune? Or would he cower and refuse to save a few platinum coins at the cost of his family's name? Duke Azarin stood silent. He could feel the weight of everyone's gazes on him. Even the barons were watching, waiting for the Duke's counter. What would he say? What would he do? While Azarin maintained an expressionless face, in his mind, he was laughing his lungs out. He had no personal issue or long-standing feud with Duke Rydian Silvershade, but it seemed the man wanted him to suffer some form of loss during this royal party. Since he proposed it, let's make a killing this time, shall we? Azarin thought with a hidden smirk, already counting the amount of money he was about to win in his mind. His thoughts, however, remained buried deep within. On the outside, his face remained completely still, cold, unreadable, and devoid of any emotion. Just when it seemed like Duke Azarin wasn't going to speak, his lips finally parted. 50%. The entire room froze at his words. Did they just hear that right? 50%? 50% of an entire year's earnings of a ducal household? If Duke Rydian's words were a grenade, then Duke Azarin Wargrave's reply was a nuclear explosion. Even Emperor Zolthamir Lux Vanthelmore doubted his own ears. Even he, an emperor, though unimaginably wealthy, would not stake that amount on a mere bet over children's squabbles. But he said nothing. After all, it wasn't his money. He wasn't the one suffering any potential loss. And besides, the party had just turned into something far more interesting than it had started out. All eyes instantly shifted from Duke Azarin to Duke Rydian like magnets, as if waiting for him to counterbet and raise it to 70%. Duke Rydian Silvershade's expression didn't change drastically, but a subtle frown could be seen if one looked closely enough. That faint crease on his forehead gave away his irritation. A ducal household always ran on yearly incomes, setting aside whatever profits they made for emergencies. Any noble family losing 50% of its yearly income would be financially crippled, whether they were a duke, an emperor, or even a baron. Although these nobles possessed vast savings, funds that could make their yearly income seem like spare change, those savings were never meant for trivial bets. They were meant for war. After all, no one wages war without money. War was an investment. You begin with wealth, and if you win, you gain more than you risked. But if you lose, everything burns down to ashes, which meant, if he lost this bet, a lot of the family's extravagant lifestyle would have to be cut in half, if not more. But Duke Rydian couldn't back down now. He had been the one who initiated the bet to pressure Duke Azarin. But now the tables had turned. The pressure was on him. If he backed down at this point, he would lose face before all the nobles present. Wait, is this a ploy to get the entire bet canceled? So he can save his family from disgrace and still save some platinum coins at the same time? Duke Rydian suddenly thought. His eyes turned sharply to Duke Azarin as his thoughts continued to swirl. Even if you are a brute, you're still cunning. But you're still a brute, Azarin. At the sides, the barons and viscounts felt a mix of awe and resentment. They would need years, possibly decades, just to save the amount of money being casually used for this bet. Yet here the dukes were, throwing it around like it was a game. They suddenly felt too poor to even exist in the same room as these people. Rydian, I advise you to make your decision. Asher has already stepped out of the banquet. Duke Mavrek Ravencroft said with a relaxed smile, clearly enjoying the unfolding show. He was buying time while his son escapes, he thought, before speaking again. Let's do it, then. At his words, the Emperor instantly acted. Taking out an orb from his space ring, he spoke firmly. Stop Asher Wargrave from leaving. Inform him that I require his presence. Shock rippled through the room as nobles began moving. They started heading down to the floor below. The bet of the century was about to begin. Present time. Asher walked calmly into the banquet hall once more. As he stepped in, his gaze flickered toward the side as he heard the doors opening, the same doors the royal twins had entered through earlier. The Emperor Zolthamir Lux Vanthelmore has arrived. The Dukes Azarin Wargrave, Mavrek Ravencroft, Sivrian Stormvale have arrived in attendance along with other noble figures. As the announcement tore through the hall, the music that had been playing ceased instantly. Thoughts paused, movements halted, then all eyes turned to the door in collective shock. Many doubted their own senses. They couldn't help but think, the Emperor has made an entrance? They would have never guessed that the Emperor himself would attend this party in person. Everyone instantly bowed in unison, greeting with practiced reverence. We greet His Royal Highness, the Emperor. Emperor Zolthamir Lux Vanthelmore stood with the grace befitting his status. Behind him, the dukes and other nobles stood silently, radiating an imposing presence that dominated the room. I thank you all for accepting my royal invitation. Emperor Zolthamir spoke as his voice, calm and commanding, echoed across the hall. I hope we continue working together to make this empire great. But, he continued after a pause, at this moment, we are here for my children, my son and my daughter. And to make the party more interesting, we shall be having a spar between the 10th son, Asher Wargrave, and Ryan Silvershade, both of whom appear to be very much interested in my daughter. At the Emperor's words, eyes immediately turned to Ryan and Asher. Everyone had seen them argue a bit earlier, perhaps over the princess. And now, it appeared they were about to fight because of it. Of course, I will not be using my imperial authority to impose this spar, the Emperor clarified. This battle was proposed by Duke Rydian Silvershade and accepted by Duke Azarin Wargrave. He paused again, allowing the nobles and guests to process what he had just said, making it clear that this was not a forced confrontation under royal command. And naturally, he added with a slight smirk, there are stakes involved. The losing household shall pay 50% of their annual income to the victorious one. At Emperor Zolthamir's words, many in the room felt weak at the knees. They mentally began calculating the amount of money at stake in this outrageous bet. But the Emperor paid no attention to their reactions. This spar will be taking place outside, and I will personally be officiating the match, Emperor Zolthamir concluded. He then turned and stepped out of the hall. The nobles followed behind him calmly, seemingly unconcerned that the Emperor had made the bet public. After all, only the losing side would suffer immense backlash and humiliation. Immediately, everyone began scrambling toward the door, racing to secure the best seat for the upcoming duel between two ducal households. So this was why I was summoned, huh? It seems no noble party ever begins in peace or ends in peace, Asher thought with a tired sigh as people rushed past him in excitement and disbelief. Besides, I didn't even know Father would be coming. And for him to agree to a 50% bet, is he that confident in me? Asher couldn't help but smile faintly at the idea that the Primarch had such faith in his abilities. Only if Asher knew. The Primarch had been the one who proposed the 50% stake himself, and was simply using his son to make a quick fortune. Asher stepped outside, arriving at a clear, large area behind castle. Everyone had already gathered around. Some stood on trees as they watched from above in order to catch every moment of the battle. Some stood at the side, some stood at the front. Asher walked to the front, where Emperor Zulthamir had designated as their battlefield. Ryan was already standing there. As the son of a duke who had been raised with discipline since birth, he stood composed and with an air of nobility around him. A calm schadenfreude smile could be seen on his face, which literally interpreted, "I'm going to take my time, enjoy this fight and your pain." Asher didn't return the smile. He simply arrived in front of Ryan with calm strides. He didn't have enough brain capacity to go around caring about or thinking deeply about a guy he had just met a few minutes ago. Emperor Zulthamir arrived between Asher and Ryan and started speaking. "This duel will end when one of you gives up or falls unconscious, or when one is about to receive a fatal injury, and I step in. No bloodline abilities, no Astra. This is purely physical." He paused, allowing Asher and Ryan to absorb and understand his words. "Remember, this duel involves 50% of your household's earnings on the line, so make it interesting. Now draw your weapons," Emperor Zulthamir said with a smile. Virilis flashed into Asher's hands. It gleamed under the moonlight, its silver reflecting the moon's rays. Everyone knew the Wargrave family could awaken soul weapons. Their eyes traced every inch and corner of Virilis, trying to see through her and discern her secrets. Will he show us the ability the rapier holds? They all wondered. To them, it seemed like the only way for Asher to win this spar was to rely on the ability of his soul weapon. But with the Emperor banning the use of bloodline abilities, Asher had no hope, or so they thought. In Ryan's hand, his own sword appeared as he stared Asher dead in the eyes. Seeing both of them ready, the Emperor vanished, his voice sounding like an echo as he disappeared. "Begin." Without even waiting for a beat, Ryan instantly blurred forward, crossing meters within seconds, his sword already screaming towards Asher's neck. Asher didn't move. He simply watched the sword approaching his neck. Seeing this, the nobles thought Asher wasn't fast enough to react. Just as the sword was about to connect, Virilis flashed forward. With a resonating clang, the two blades met. Ryan frowned. He couldn't believe Asher had kept up. After all, Asher had only just awakened. Even with the Wargrave's physique, it should have been impossible to match his speed. He moved again, his sword changing targets this time as it sliced toward Asher's chest, threatening to tear it open. Weak Asher thought. His mind could telegraph everything Ryan did before he even did it, his breath, his muscle contractions, his heartbeat. Asher sensed it all, his omni-perception showing everything to him like it was written in a book. Asher didn't bother blocking this time. He simply sidestepped. His right knee instantly swept upward. With a bam, it detonated against Ryan's ribs. Pain exploded at the point of impact, but before Ryan could regain his footing, Asher was already there. Virilis floated in the air as if giving up on this useless spar. Asher's fist connected with Ryan's temple like a battering ram. Ryan felt his consciousness flicker in and out. He couldn't understand what was happening. One moment he had attacked, and the next he was being beaten down. His eyes couldn't even follow the speed of Asher's movements. But Asher didn't wait. He moved without pausing. A sweeping kick to the knees, Ryan buckled and dropped to the ground. He blinked as his sides crashed against the earth. He opened his eyes just in time to see a fist screaming down from above toward his face. His body reacted on instinct as he instantly threw himself to the side, frantically dodging. But Asher's fist didn't impact the floor beneath him. His hand froze mid-motion, then instantly changed rhythm as his elbow snapped sideways toward Ryan's gut. He could read Ryan. He had already seen him dodging before he even moved. Asher had simply adjusted to Ryan's movements. Ryan's sword instantly flashed as he tried to slice Asher's elbow with its sharp edge and cleave his arm off at once. But in a blur of motion, Asher's body rotated. His torso, waist, and shoulders flowed to the side, his footwork guiding him seamlessly. His hand shot upward like a launched rocket, tearing through the air as it slammed into Ryan's chin. The sound of impact exploded in everyone's ears as the crack of bone and teeth breaking echoed. The force of the impact lifted Ryan off the ground briefly, but before his feet could land again, Asher's knuckles blasted against his nose. Ryan's head jerked backward, his neck following in tandem, before his entire body was dragged by the force and inertia as he rolled backward. Asher walked toward Ryan with calm strides, his purple eyes unconcerned for the boy struggling to stand. Ryan felt pain from every part of his body. His nerves sent only signals of torment. He was still just a kid. He couldn't shut them out. His mind and body ached, but he didn't scream. His father was watching. Yet at the same time, he couldn't believe his eyes. Asher was never supposed to be this strong physically. It was impossible. He couldn't understand how Asher had been so fast that he couldn't keep up with his movements. If only I could use Astra, I could augment my movement and attacks. I would have buried him in bones, his mind raged. He wanted to use his bloodline abilities in Astra, but he knew he couldn't simply throw away the Emperor's orders. His eyes shifted to his father, who looked at him with an expressionless face. He knew, even though the man showed no emotion, that was only because various nobles were gathered here, watching. Otherwise, Rydian's face would have twisted into a frown. Ryan's gaze shifted from his father back to the cause of this impossibility before him. But all his eyes met was a foot crushing down from above like a hammer. It impacted his face with a sickening bam. His head slammed into the ground, and the earth beneath his skull buckled as spiderweb-like cracks spread out. But Asher wasn't done. He removed his foot, crimson blood dripping from it. His leg moved as it changed position. It hovered over Ryan's knee like an ominous UFO. Then it crashed downward. Then it came, the sound of bones shattering under pure, unrestrained force. Ryan's leg snapped as the bones turned to dust. Ryan couldn't bear the pain anymore. A piercing scream tore through his throat. "AR!" His voice tore through the air, slamming into everyone's ears like thunder. But Asher didn't care. His foot moved like a viper, instantly crushing Ryan's larynx. Instantly, the scream vanished, as if it had never existed. Asher didn't pause. His foot lifted again. Ryan's eyes widened in horror. Asher was no different than an extremely dangerous Emovira in his eyes. He watched helplessly as the foot crashed down again against his second knee. But he couldn't scream. He couldn't do anything. He couldn't even give up. He needed his voice for that. Asher's foot descended yet again as he crushed Ryan's elbows like they were nothing but twigs. With that, Ryan fell unconscious. He couldn't survive that kind of pain. Asher stood with a calm gaze as he stared down at the mangled boy called Ryan, who now lay half dead. Originally, Asher would have exchanged attacks with his opponents, trying to gain as much battle experience as possible, if there was any to gain. But not this time. If there was anything Asher hated, it was stupid people who couldn't mind their own business or simply shut their mouths when it was clearly the better option. He had ignored Ryan, not because he couldn't respond, but simply because he couldn't be bothered. He didn't have a time to argue or fight with someone over a woman he had just met. It wasn't worth his attention. Asher wasn't someone who allowed his emotions to be manipulated so easily. Even as they were about to spar, Asher could feel Ryan's gaze and smug smile. He knew exactly what Ryan wanted, to make him scream, to make him beg, and to make him bleed. So Asher returned the favor, not with a smile or a word, but with his actions. He had no plans to waste his precious time by dragging out the match or allowing Ryan to attack for a while, just for show. He simply ended things from the very beginning, with overwhelming, brutal precision. He didn't care if people doubted him or speculated about how strong he actually was. Asher wasn't going to hide his abilities. Though he would naturally conceal a few things as a trump card, he wasn't going to act weak or try to match Ryan evenly just because nobles were watching. He wasn't here to play that kind of game. If he had transmigrated into this world as a commoner, that would have been one thing. But he was born as a wargrave, someone with the backing of monsters, both literal and figurative. There was no need for him to play the strong, acting weak role. That wasn't his style. The entire clearing had descended into absolute silence. Every single conversation had ceased. No whispers, no murmurs, only wide eyes and gaping mouths as everyone stared on in extreme disbelief. Asher was supposed to be crushed. That was what they expected. But here he was doing the impossible right in front of their eyes. He overpowered his opponent with speed, strength, precision, and terrifying efficiency. They watched him flow from one attack to another like a ceaseless tide. Even when Ryan dodged or blocked, it was as if Asher had already seen it coming, like he could peer a few seconds into the future and adjust accordingly. At this moment, only the sound of bones breaking thundered in their eardrums. They heard Ryan scream, but then they saw Asher cut off his screams as easily as he had landed the first blow. The sounds of bones snapping, crunching, and breaking continued, without pause, without hesitation, without remorse, and without an ounce of mercy. Many people swallowed hard. Their bodies reacted involuntarily, a jolt of cold fear running down their spines, as if they themselves could feel just a fraction of Ryan's pain. But none moved. They stood as if frozen in time. This was the failed heir. This was the ruined heir. The disgrace of the Wargrave bloodline. The dim sun. If he was a failure, then what were they? They couldn't help but think, the question hammering into their minds. They watched as Ryan, the son of a duke, lay half dead on the ground. Only the faint rise and fall of his chest served as proof that he was still clinging to life. Asher's hands moved with calculated grace. He pulled out a handkerchief from the pocket of his chest coat, calmly wiped the blood from his hands, and dropped the cloth beside Ryan's broken body. Without a second glance, he turned and walked away. He didn't wait for the Emperor to declare winner. He didn't need to. Even the Emperor hadn't moved, just stared at Asher as he approached. Squish, squish. The sound echoed softly from Asher's shoes, soaked in blood, as he walked. His right hand was gently placed across the left side of his chest. His left arm folded behind his back in an elegant, respectful posture as he greeted. "I greet His Royal Majesty, the Emperor." At the sound of his voice, the Emperor smiled. He reached out and patted Asher on the shoulder. "You've done well," the Emperor said with a nod. "Thank you, Your Majesty." Asher intoned respectfully. His gaze then turned toward Azarin, who simply stared at him with golden eyes, expressionless as always. "I hope I was able to please the Primarch," Asher said, bowing once more. "You did good. You may return, as you had planned," Azarin replied calmly, his voice as devoid of emotion as ever. Asher nodded, turned without hesitation, and walked past them. Virilis floated behind him, its body humming softly like a lullaby. Once outside, Asher stepped into the awaiting carriage and left the royal palace, this time without any obstructions. Duke Rydian's silver shade appeared beside the unconscious Ryan in a flash. He bent down, scooped up his son's broken body, and vanished just as quickly. The nobles began leaving one by one, each with their own thoughts swirling in their minds. Some were already itching to gossip about what they had just witnessed, unable to keep such juicy news to themselves for long. But one thing remained undeniably true. The Silvershade family had suffered immense losses today. They had shot themselves in the foot. Emperor Zolthamir and the rest of the dukes had already vanished from the viewing arena, reappearing within the room they were previously in. "Azarin, are you sure that Asher Kid failed his awakening?" Duke Mavrek Ravencroft asked as he sat down gently. A bird flew in from the window and landed on his head like it was nesting, but Mavrek didn't react. It seemed completely normal to him. "Indeed, it seems you fooled Rydian into suffering these losses," Duchess Sivrian Stormvale intoned. "Let's be clear. Nobody was fooled into anything," Emperor Zolthamir said, his voice even. "Rydian was the one who proposed the bet himself. The damage is already done. But I have to say, your son is a monster," Zolthamir added, nodding thoughtfully. "His hand-to-hand combat techniques are flawless. If his fists are that good, I wonder how terrifying his sword skills must be." Still, Azarin said nothing. He simply sat in silence, but his mind was elsewhere, counting platinum coins. "I should probably return and tell Zarek," he thought, already planning how he would brag about this moment later. "Don't you have anything to say, Azarin?" Mavrek asked, lifting the bird from his head and gently petting it. I'm sure Rydian is already rushing home to get his son healed. Azarin's golden gaze turned lazily to Mavrek. There's nothing to say. This much is expected of all wargraves. Sigh, what did I even expect from you? Mavrek said with a helpless sigh. Who would have thought your son's confidence during his conversation with the princess wasn't unfounded? Duchess Sivrian said with a soft smile. He simply didn't know her well enough to fight her, as he had claimed. She generally approved of men who didn't think with the equipment between their legs, which was why she found herself liking Asher more and more. You really made a killing this time, Zolthamir said with a chuckle. When do you plan to collect the coins? Azarin seemed to pause in thought for a moment before replying monotonously. Today. I don't have time to be moving around tomorrow. The rest of them nodded. As dukes and people of great power, their schedules were packed beyond belief. And so, their conversation continued without Duke Rydian Silvershade, who at that very moment was rushing desperately to the Silvershade estate, trying to save his son's life. Asher sat silently in his carriage as it rolled forward under the moonlight, wrapped in the blanket of the night. At this time, Lyra wasn't with him inside the carriage. She sat on her own horse, riding just beside the moving vehicle. Asher sat with his eyes closed. The window beside him was also shut as he remained deep in thought. He could still feel his boots soaked with the heavy, iron-rich smell of blood. With every part of his body enhanced, especially his senses, the scent slammed into his nostrils like a tidal wave. He felt nauseous. He felt like vomiting, as though he could literally taste the blood on his tongue. But Asher didn't dare throw up. He clenched his jaw and forced everything back in. Asher couldn't be blamed. Prior to his transmigration, when he was still Ethan, he had never been in a single fight, not even a minor scuffle involving a thrown fist. So naturally, Asher hardly ever saw blood. Even when he did, it was either from a minor bruise or a small cut that produced a mere drop and nothing more. But this was different. The only reason he hadn't vomited at this point was due to the 2-day-long massacre of weak beasts that had crossed his path during this journey to the capital. Their blood had stained him repeatedly. Slowly but surely, he had gotten used to its sight and stench. I wonder what it would feel like to kill a person. Asher thought, his mind drifting as he stared blankly ahead. He knew that sooner or later, he would have to fight someone to the death. Asher was sure even a split-second hesitation on his part could lead to decapitation. But he wouldn't hesitate. He didn't plan to. And he knew that this gut-twisting sensation, this nauseating discomfort, would pass eventually. It was only a matter of time. He would adapt. He had to. Besides, that wasn't the only thing bothering him. Something else made his brows furrow at that very moment. His gaze shifted to the system notification floating before him. Detecting mind invasion, mind shield activated. Memory manipulation detected, mind shield activated. His purple eyes stared at the system panel in silence. When Asher had first received this notification, he had been stunned, shocked into speechlessness. But at the same time, it made sense. This was a noble gathering, after all. People who smiled at your face while simultaneously stabbing you from behind. If the system hadn't warned him, if it had just quietly protected his mind, he would have been unaware and completely oblivious. The first system notification had appeared the very moment Asher dropped his handkerchief beside the unconscious Ryan. This meant that whoever had tried to interfere with his mind had waited until the spar ended to make their move. Earlier, during the royal party itself, no one had bothered trying to read Asher's memory. They had all deemed him unimportant. But after witnessing the spar, their curiosity had ignited. They had wanted to uncover what secrets he was hiding. The second system notification came at the exact moment the Emperor, Zolthamir Lux Vanfilmore, touched Asher's shoulder while smiling and congratulating him. It had been such a casual gesture, such a normal action, that without the system's alert, Asher wouldn't have suspected anything. Could it be a coincidence? Asher wondered, placing 2 fingers under his chin in thought. He didn't want to label the Emperor as someone who had tried to manipulate his memory right there in front of 4 dukes. But at the same time, Asher wouldn't put it past him. This was an emperor who had probably been scheming since birth, perhaps even from within his mother's womb. Besides, anyone who possessed the ability to manipulate memories wouldn't go around announcing it to the world. They would be killed instantly, if only to ensure that certain secrets and vulnerabilities remained hidden. Asher's face darkened as another unsettling thought entered his mind. If Emperor Zolthamir is truly behind the memory manipulation, then how much of Father's mind has he tampered with? The idea alone made Asher's stomach churn. And it wouldn't just be Duke Azarin's mind. What about the other dukes? The other nobles? The royal knights? The number of potential victims grew with every second Asher spent thinking about it. But at the same time, there was no way nobles at the level of dukes wouldn't have some means of defending their minds, whether through artifacts or unique abilities, especially beings of their caliber. Even the slightest tampering should instantly alert them. But that was now, when they were already powerful. What about when they were younger? When they were Asher's age, weak, inexperienced, and vulnerable? Back then, they could have easily fallen prey to such manipulation. But also, during that time, Zolthamir himself might not have developed his ability to such a high level. Asher's frown deepened. Emperor Zolthamir, a dangerous man. I must also be wary of others with psychic abilities. Just because only 2 people tried to invade my mind doesn't mean only 2 people possess the ability. His mind drifted to Vaelra Lux Vanthelmore and her twin brother, Vaelric Lux Vanthelmore. As prince and princess of the Empire, manipulation and scheming had to be like oxygen to them. Could one, or both, of them have inherited the Emperor's memory manipulation ability? Asher closed his eyes again. The noble circle is truly dangerous. I have to tread carefully, he thought, the intensity in his expression sharpening. The Emperor's ability to manipulate memories proved something vital to Asher, something he couldn't afford to forget. Just because someone hailed from a particular bloodline or lineage didn't mean they couldn't awaken a unique, personal ability outside their heritage. Power in this world wasn't always bound by ancestry. Sometimes it was random or fated. Asher sighed. He could choose to warn his father, or he could stay silent. But he wasn't sure how it would all pan out. Though he guessed that noble households, like the dukes and perhaps even emperors of other empires, would have some form of protection against mind attacks, that was just speculation. He could warn Duke Azarin, but who knew how the Duke would respond? For all Asher knew, his father and the others might already be under the Emperor's influence. This world is dangerous. I wonder how dangerous the Emoviri are, Asher mused, a chill running down his spine. He shook his head, choosing to set everything aside for now. His mind and senses shifted back to the blood on his clothes and the soles of his boots. Yet this time, that gut-twisting sensation had disappeared. He no longer felt nauseous. He felt perfectly fine. A small smile appeared on his lips. He hadn't expected to adapt this quickly. By the time Asher arrived at the inn, the night had already deepened. After a long bath and a warm supper, he jumped onto the bed and collapsed into it. Though a part of his mind still reasoned that Ryan's father might send assassins after him, Asher felt no fear. With Duke Azarin here, Ryan's father would be powerless to act. So Asher allowed himself to drift off into sleep. After all, tomorrow marked the beginning of their journey back to the Wargrave estate. What a dangerous world, he thought. That was Asher's final thought before he slipped into the depths of dreamland. In a chamber designed with extreme opulence, exquisite paintings hung on the walls, and golden lanterns were spread out, illuminating the room with a warm, majestic glow. Within the room, a figure stood facing the window, gazing out at the world before him. He was draped in white and black robes interwoven with golden accents. His cape billowed gently behind him as he stood with a small, thoughtful smile on his face. Emperor Zolthamir Lux Vanthelmore. His mind was on Asher. He couldn't quite understand what the boy had done, how he had so effortlessly dismantled Ryan Silvershade without breaking a sweat. I shouldn't have imposed that rule that limited the spar to physical combat only, Zolthamir thought with a hint of regret. He had established that rule to protect Asher, whom he had believed to be weaker than Ryan. After all, if Ryan had been allowed to use his bone manipulation abilities, who knew what kind of damage he could have caused to the 10th son? I could have gained insight and valuable information about his abilities, Zolthamir mused, the smile never leaving his lips. He even resisted my memory manipulation ability. Does that mean he has awakened some kind of mind protection ability and just doesn't realize it? Zolthamir was lost in contemplation. Someone who possessed a mind protection ability would have known the moment their mind was being intruded upon. They would have reacted, even if subtly. Their eyes would have darted around to find the source. Their muscles would have tensed, ready for a fight. But Zolthamir had seen none of these signs in Asher. The boy didn't even flinch. He spoke and walked away with calm strides and steady eyes, completely unaffected. Is it the ability of that sole weapon of his, the rapier? Zolthamir wondered. It seemed like a plausible explanation. He could remember the rapier floating silently behind the boy as he walked past him. Besides, in the Wargrave household, there are records of soul weapons possessing mind protective abilities. Just like them, Zolthamir thought, his ever-present smile sharpening ever so slightly. Although I didn't use the full extent of my ability, just to keep it hidden from the Dukes. Zolthamir reflected calmly. He hadn't unleashed the full power of his memory manipulation ability on Asher due to the presence of the Dukes and other nobles. Maintaining the secrecy of such a rare and dangerous skill was more important than a brief probe into the boy's mind. He didn't believe Asher, or his weapon, at their current levels, could possibly resist him if he truly tried. Although his ability was called memory manipulation, it allowed him more than just altering memories. He could also read them. After all, one must read a memory before they can manipulate it. He could choose to read and then simply not tamper with it. That had been his plan, to scan Asher's mind quietly, then decide his next course of action on a later date. But his ability had a notable limitation. It required physical contact. That was why he had placed his hand on Asher's shoulder. Did Azarin's 10th son really awaken only a week ago? If so, how is he already this strong? And if he didn't, and instead awakened at 15 on his first try, why would the Wargraves hide it? If they had planned to keep it secret, Azarin would never have allowed Asher to win. He wouldn't have accepted Rydian's bet in the first place. Zolthamir's thoughts spiraled. Based on the information his spies had reported from within the Wargrave household, Asher Wargrave had awakened recently, something that now seemed more suspicious than ever. Have the Wargraves finally started using their brains? Zolthamir scoffed inwardly. I should adjust my plans, but I'll need to tread carefully. I don't have to worry about Azarin. He doesn't care about politics, only his spear. But his first son, Malric Wargrave, is a problem. Malric was ridiculously talented, to the point that no one had ever witnessed the full extent of his abilities. Because if they had, they'd already be dead. His only supposed weakness was his love for his siblings, but that wasn't a weakness at all. They were a family of monsters. What truly set Malric apart wasn't just his strength. It was his mind. He could think deeply, strategically, coldly. He could act on impulse when needed, but remain calculated and docile when the moment demanded it. Zolthamir recalled the time he had kidnapped Malric's personal butler, attempting to extract information from his memories. But before his people could even reach the secure destination, Malric was already there, waiting, as if he had planned the entire thing, as if he had seen it all coming. Although Malric was younger than Azarin, it had been speculated repeatedly that he had already surpassed his father in terms of power. Of course, many dismissed this as absurd. Azarin was monstrously strong, ridiculously so, and to surpass him, one had to be a god among men. Even Zolthamir didn't believe the rumor and had tossed it aside as nonsense. But whatever schemes he threw at Malric, the boy responded with terrifying precision, not just defending, but counterattacking in brutal fashion. He wiped out everyone involved, down to their families, their friends, and even their allies. Malric was ruthless in every sense of the word. Sometimes, Zolthamir wondered if Malric even loved his siblings, considering the kind of merciless behavior he displayed. He remembered clearly the time Malric wiped out an entire Count noble household, because the Count had looked at the fifth moon with suggestive eyes and an inappropriate smile. Zolthamir had suffered immense losses under Malric's hand in his efforts to discover the young man's weaknesses to find some kind of hold over him. Anything, really. But in the end, neither of them could move directly against the other. One was the emperor. The other was already set to be the next Primarch. They couldn't just clash in the open, not yet. Sigh. This Wargrave family keeps giving me a headache every new day. How many monsters can a single bloodline possibly produce? Zolthamir thought with a sigh. He had once entertained the theory that Malric had awakened an ability that allowed him to see the future, but it remained just a theory. And besides, the future was ever-changing. In terms of political power and raw combat strength, Malric stood untouched. Nobles didn't even dare blink in his direction. Even the dukes exercised caution around him, because no one knew what truly lay behind that unnerving smile of his.